Can we confirm that? Yes, they are on the moon, ladies and gentlemen.
Radio and television signals from the moon take less than 2 seconds to reach us here on Earth. So if we do get television pictures, they'll be essentially broadcasting live. That's right, live from the moon.
Little more than guesswork, but experts have long anticipated the possible viewership of over 500 million people.
Really happening?
I'm hearing we're getting a picture. Is that right? We have a picture? Sid, can we patch into... Got it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a live signal from the moon. I'm having some trouble seeing it. There, I see it. There it is. Amazing. Just unbelievable. The shock across the nation at this event, indeed the shock across the world, is just indescribable. What was considered a fantasy just a short time ago is coming true right before our eyes. I believe we're looking at the legs of the lunar lander. There at the bottom of your screen is what appears to be a ladder. No word yet on when someone will be climbing down that ladder, but wait, here we go. I see something. There he is. We have him. Oh my goodness. Wow. Can you believe it? After thousands of years, ladies and gentlemen, gazing up in the heavens and dreaming of this day, a man is about to set foot on the moon.
Я делаю этот шаг во имя моей страны, во имя моего народа и во имя марксистско-ленинского образа жизни. Я осознаю.
Don't know what he's saying, obviously, but we'll get a translation of his words. Man's first words from the moon. Just a minute.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Theirs was a journey like no other, for they were the first to set foot on the lunar surface.
The Eagle has landed.
It all began in Scotland, where the story cited its source from the Edinburgh Journal of Science. The headline read Great Astronomical Discoveries, made by prominent astronomer Sir John Herschel, who at the time was at a remote field trip in South Africa, and for the first time in history by means of a remarkable new telescope, he was able to glimpse life fantastical on the moon.
The New York Sun published a series of 6 articles claiming that life had been discovered on the moon. Life including unicorns and beavers that walked on their hind legs. The crowning touch of it was the discovery of the so-called man bats. The Vespertilio homo was supposedly the Latin name. These remarkable 4-foot-tall creatures who flew and talked and built temples and did art and apparently fornicated in public.
Let's stop here. In case you missed that, he did say man bats on the moon fornicating in public, and people actually believed it.
This series caused a tremendous sensation. It was reprinted in rival newspapers. By some estimates, 90% of people in New York City believed it. And by the time that the hoax was over, the New York Sun was the most widely read newspaper in the world.
But it turns out Sir John Herschel did not make these astronomical discoveries, nor were they reprinted from the Edinburgh Journal of Science. The 2 key players behind these fabricated lunar discoveries were New York Sun's publisher Benjamin Day and New York Sun's editor Richard Adams Locke.
The 2 men tested their moon lakes and began setting their scientific experiments.
Look at the moon. The moon shows you the evidence.
We can just look at it, it's just filled with holes.
Right.
Big fucking craters all over that you can see with the naked eye.
Some of it's not theory, like on that subject as a teenager, but as a grown person is when the thing happened where they hit it with the missile and it rang like a bell.
Yeah.
Like,
what was the explanation for that?
the question is, who will offer an explanation?
Right.
Because it wasn't like that. They didn't just do it once. It rang like a bell for hours and hours and hours.
Imagine if that's a feature for a stable planet that they put there.
Despite it being humanity's constant companion through all of recorded time, the moon is still a mystery. Science hasn't been able to explain how the moon was formed, its unusual orbit, its distance from us, its density, its composition, its structure. These are all still questions. Now, there are theories about the moon that solve some of these puzzles, but they don't solve all of them. There's only one theory that answers every scientific question about the moon. Just one. That the moon is a hollow artificial structure brought here by someone else. Let's find out why. We're taught that the moon has been here forever. But there's controversy about this because scientists can't agree on how the moon was formed in the first place. The first theory of how the moon became linked to the Earth is the capture theory. It says the moon was just floating along, drifted near the Earth, and was pulled into orbit. This is almost impossible. Another explanation is the accretion theory, that the moon and Earth formed out of dust clouds in the early solar system. But when systems form through accretion, they share similar traits. If the moon was formed this way, it would have an iron core, like the Earth. It would spin on an axis, like the Earth. But neither of these are true. The fission hypothesis was popular for a while, and this says the early Earth was spinning so fast that the moon was formed out of rock in the Pacific Ocean that was flung into space. But we later learned that moon rock is much older than the bottom of the ocean, so this is unlikely. The most popular explanation is the giant impact theory. This says that a large object about the size of Mars smashed into the proto-Earth. The debris field from the collision coalesced to create the Earth-Moon system. Again, these conditions would have to be so perfect that the odds are
astronomical.
Right. Now, a recent theory is a combination of all of these. That a large object collided with the Earth about 4.5 billion years ago, essentially vaporizing it. And this vapor is called a synestia. And the synestia was spinning very rapidly, forming a torus. And the moon formed on the edge of this torus. In geometry, if you revolve a circle around an axis in three-dimensional space, it's called a torus. Okay, so for us to explore this theory, you need to concede that we went to the moon. The moon's surface is pockmarked by asteroid impacts that have happened for billions of years. So you would expect the rock around the impact craters to be different ages. But there is a strange uniformity in the age of these rocks. Titanium, chromium, and zirconium are rare on Earth, but these are found in abundance on the moon. If the Earth and moon were formed together, why such a big discrepancy? And those metals happen to be some of the most strongest materials that are known to exist, and they're highly resistant to corrosion. If you wanted to reinforce a structure, these are the metals you would use. This structural reinforcement could explain why moon craters all seem to be the same depth, no matter how wide they are. Shouldn't craters of different sizes be of different depths? It's as if there's a resilient metallic shell just beneath the surface of the moon, preventing anything from penetrating further. After returning to the command module, the Apollo 12 crew intentionally released the lunar lander, crashing it into the moon's surface. Then something very unexpected happened. Seismic measurements showed that the moon rang like a bell and reverberated for more than an hour. This was with a very small object compared to the size of the moon, so during Apollo 13, an even heavier object was crashed into the surface. This time, the moon rang for over 3 hours, and vibrations traveled to a depth of 20 miles. This doesn't happen on Earth. Reverberations last only a few minutes because of the Earth's density. And on Earth, vibrations slow down as they move toward the Earth's center, where material is denser. But the vibrations on the moon actually got faster around 40 miles down, indicating the interior of the moon is not only far less dense, but perhaps has large hollow cavities. The density of the moon is something that's difficult to explain. The moon is about 25% the size of the Earth, but it's only about 1% of the Earth's density. If the moon were a hollow shell, this would explain that. Besides the density issue, the moon has a lot of characteristics and coincidences that we don't see anywhere else. The moon is actually more like a planet than a moon. At 1/4 the Earth's size, no other object in the solar system has a moon this large. This occurs nowhere else, not in our solar system or any other solar system that we found. And the moon orbits much more closely than it should. And its orbit is also a mystery. It's the only object we've ever observed with a near perfectly circular orbit. We don't see this anywhere else either. Because of this near perfect orbit and its size and distance from the Earth, the moon appears in the sky as almost the exact same size as the sun. This is what allows us to have eclipses. Our distance to the sun is 400 times our distance to the moon, and the size of the sun is 400 times the size of the moon. Could this be a coincidence?
Nah.
Well, when enough coincidences pile up, we may have to adjust our thinking and be a little more open-minded. And that's what happened in 1970. Two Soviet scientists looked at all the evidence and all these coincidences and came to what they felt was the only logical conclusion. And they agreed that their theory sounded crazy, but said not only is the moon hollow, but it's also a spacecraft that traveled here in the distant past. So now we have to ask, who built the moon? Every ancient culture on Earth has stories about the moon, but it's interesting that the further back you go, the fewer stories there are. And if you go back far enough, there are stories that talk about a sky before the moon arrived. Roman and Greek authors in the 5th century BC have stories about the Proselynes, and they lived in an area called Arcadia. And they said they've been here since before there was a moon in the heavens. Now, on the other side of the world, the ancient culture of Tiwanaku in Bolivia also refers to a time when there was no moon. The Tiwanaku claim the moon arrived between 11,500 and 13,000 years ago. If you're into ancient theories as much as I am, you'll recognize that this time coincides perfectly with a period called the Younger Dryas. And all kinds of myths and mysteries are said to have happened during the Younger Dryas, and we'll cover them on this channel. Now, going back to Africa, there are Zulu legends that specifically say the moon is hollow, and living inside is an intelligent race of reptilian extraterrestrials. The Zulu believe the moon was put into orbit by two brothers who were gods, and this legend is similar to what the Sumerians believed. The Sumerians also had a legend of two brothers, Enki and Enlil, who were called
Anunnaki.
Yup, Anunnaki, the extraterrestrial gods who created mankind.
Everything is falling into place with this one.
Oh, you ain't seen nothing yet. How about this? The Zulu also believed that before the moon arrived, the climate of the Earth was very different. There were no seasons, and a blanket of thick water vapor covered the entire planet. And we now know that the moon does stabilize our climate. Without the moon's gravity, the Earth's axis would wobble. There would be no consistent seasons, no tides, extreme weather. The presence of the moon is what allows life on Earth to thrive. So back to the Zulu. The Earth was covered by a thick layer of water vapor, and you could only see the sun through this hazy mist. When the moon was finally placed into orbit, all this water vapor fell at once, and it created a cataclysmic global flood. Every ancient culture has a flood myth, and there's mounting evidence that this did indeed happen during the Younger Dryas. Cultures around the world have myths that are in perfect sync with each other. The coincidences keep piling up. The Zulu legend talks about how the arrival of the moon changed the tides and stabilized the climate. And this is something that wasn't understood by science until the past 100 years. Yet somehow the ancient Zulu were able to make the connection between the moon and the tides and the seasons. All of these myths and legends, plus strange coincidences and anomalies about the moon, start to add up to a compelling theory that the moon is hollow, is artificial, and was placed here by intelligent beings long ago. But coincidences aren't proof, and myths aren't proof. We need to know what's been happening on the moon lately to see if we can make our case with hard evidence. Lucky for us, the evidence is there. Science tells us that the moon is a cold, lifeless place. It has no atmosphere. There hasn't been seismic activity for millions of years. Its core, unlike the Earth's, is cold. For a supposedly dead world, there's an awful lot of activity up there. On March 7, 1971, a cloud of water vapor appeared on the moon that covered 100 square miles, and it was there for 14 hours before it dissipated. There's not supposed to be atmosphere on the moon, but for those 14 hours, there was. In fact, 6 astronomers in the past 100 years have documented a glowing mist in the crater named Plato. The same mist, the same crater, over many years. Boulder tracks are seen on the moon, all over the place. And that's weird enough, but how do boulders roll for miles and then go uphill, like in this photo? And since the days of Aristotle, astronomers have seen strange lights appear on the surface of the moon, sometimes visible with the naked eye. NASA even reported that between the years 1540 and 1967, there were 570 sightings of light flashes on the moon that couldn't be explained. Sightings of strange lights continue to this day. The Aristarchus crater was photographed in 1992, and it shows a glowing blue light, now called the Blue Gem. And this anomaly has been seen by Earth-based telescopes every few years since. Some have even speculated it's a fusion reactor. And these events of mysterious light and mist happen so frequently that there's even a name for them, transient lunar phenomena, or TLPs. But things get even more weird. There are plenty of photographs of what appear to be artificial objects on the surface of the moon. Towers that reach several miles high, pyramids, symmetrical structures. These have been photographed by astronomers, probes, even the astronauts themselves. And the biggest anomaly of all? Why haven't we gone back to the moon? Sergeant Carl Wolf was working as a technician for the Air Force, and he was repairing equipment that transferred images from a lunar satellite. Those photos, according to Sergeant Wolf, showed artificial structures on the moon, what he described as a base. And this is corroborated by another technician working with Wolf. And Wolf wasn't a UFO, ET, moon theory guy. He was just a tech. He said he was excited to see the pictures on the news and have NASA explain what they were. He was surprised when the photos never turned up. The photos were found in a very early release from NASA. These structures are very large and very tall. You can even see they cast shadows. And these are photos I'd like to learn more about, but I can't. They no longer exist. Now, almost immediately after landing on the moon, the Apollo 11 crew said they saw something that shook them up. Watch the press conference they gave when they returned. These men aren't acting like they made history or had a life-changing experience.
It's a beginning of a new age.
In space, have you ever looked away from Earth into the black void?
Yeah. Because you can see. Because you can see the stars.
Oh yeah.
And pretty much all the time you can see the stars.
It's not
the cool thing.
I mean, it's black, but there's all kinds of little polka dots.
There's all the stars there, and the cool thing is about it, you can see it during the day.
Yeah, you can, and there's more than stars. You can see planets. You can see moons.
You see the gas Magellan clouds of the
Milky
Way galaxy.
The planet cloudy, the zodiacal light.
Whoa.
I don't recall during the period of time that we were photographing the sonar curler what stars we could see.
I don't remember seeing any.
Neil, you were.
I don't remember seeing any.
Neil, you were.
They look sad, frightened, uncomfortable, even depressed. Why? Is there a reason we haven't returned to the moon? And could it be that the Apollo missions discovered something that ancient cultures knew centuries ago? Something that reputable scientists believe is the only answer to this list of mysteries. That the moon is not what it seems or what we've been told. The moon is hollow, artificially constructed, and appeared in Earth's orbit from somewhere else, far away. When Joe Rogan started questioning the moon landing, that exposed the theory to a huge new audience.
Between 1969 and 1972, they had seven attempts, 6 of them successful. That was the only time in history that a human being has been more than 400 miles above the Earth's surface.
Good evening. I'm sorry not to be able to be with you tonight to receive this great honor of the D.W. Griffith Award. But I'm in London making Eyes Wide Shut with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman.
Kubrick was a strange guy.
Yeah,
Do you know he would do complex mathematics in his spare time?
Really?
Yeah, he's like a legitimate genius.
Wow.
And he would put all sorts of like weird hidden meaning into all of his movies. Like a thing was never just a thing. Like there's a big crazy conspiracy about The Shining that inside of it is all sorts of information that it relates to the moon landing.
Yeah.
You know
like
that?
room. Yeah, the room.
like
the
kid
room
has
in the
Apollo
hotel.
Shirt, 200. I think it's room 237, right? Yeah, 237. That's the documentary on it. The moon is, well, it depends on what time of the year and where, but it's between 237 and 265,000 miles away.
Well, and they say that he directed the fake movie about the fake moon landing.
Well, that's the big conspiracy theory. Yeah, but he was into weird shit. He was a legitimate genius.
Yeah.
Like Eyes Wide Shut, that's another fucking strange movie. He did a lot of strange movies, man.
Yeah, he did. Well, did he do Clockwork Orange? Was that him?
Yeah, that was Kubrick.
Jesus, that
There's
was
a Full Metal Jacket documentary.
Oh.
That whole thing they shot in London.
Really?
Because he wouldn't leave his home.
Really?
So they made the second half of the movie is supposed to be in Vietnam and like
Is it
some
in London?
area in part of England.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. He wouldn't leave London. Fuck you. I'm staying here. But this movie's supposed to be in the middle of the jungle. Yeah. Well, it's right here. Here's the jungle. Fuck off.
Right. Damn.
This conspiracy theory about him directing the moon landing was that he was doing it at the same time he was doing 2001. So because he was faking this space movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey, that they used him to fake the moon landing footage.
Uh-huh.
And there's a fake documentary, not a real documentary, but a fake, like a mockumentary, where he's admitting and people are talking about. Have you seen that one?
No, but that makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, dude, you didn't even know there's an actual real interview with him where he admits that he faked the moon landing. But it's not.
Yeah.
It's fake, but there's so many weird things to it. There's so many weird things with the photographs. And there's like intersecting shadows that indicate different light sources. There's all sorts of
The
weird
flag waving.
Yeah, it's weird shit, man. There's a lot of weird shit. The fact that this is the only time in human history that something is not cheaper, easier, and faster to replicate than it was in 1969. Between 1969 and 1972, there was 7 trips, 6 successful, where they went to the moon and back. And every space flight since then has been like near Earth orbit. You know, everything is like, just a few miles up. It's not. They don't go like they did then. I mean, I think everything since then is like 300 miles. Every human travel, like space shuttles and stuff like that. They never go that far.
Yeah.
They never go into deep space and come back. The only time they came back was during the moon landings in the 60s, when they were lying about everything. If you watch the post-flight press conference, and again, I'm not saying that this is actually what's happening, but it seems completely like they're full of shit. When they come back, it seems like they're lying and they're nervous, and they ask them about the stars. And again, I'm not on the camp that they faked it, but there was Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins. And Michael Collins, they asked him about stars, and in the press conference, he's like, I don't recall seeing any stars. Problem with that is, like, Michael Collins never left the lunar module. He wasn't supposed to be one of the guys that was on the surface of the moon. He was up in the craft that was circling, those in orbit around the moon. And then later, when he wrote a book about it, he talked about how magnificent the stars looked. So he has inconsistencies. So the hoax people point to that. They also point to the inconsistencies of the actual movement of the astronauts on the moon. Like, there's videos that make it look like they were on wires. There's videos that
there's like the back of his suit is being pulled by something.
It's weird. But there's a video of them where it looks like they're on trampolines, which is very strange. They're bouncing around on the surface of the moon, like literally, and you can't see their feet, or they're like hidden behind equipment. They're just bouncing up in the air, and you're like, it's fun. It's fun to think that Kubrick faked it all.
Stanley Kubrick is considered one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. Of his 13 movies, a few are considered classics. But in 1968, Kubrick released 2001: A Space Odyssey, and this is more than a classic, it's a masterpiece, and widely regarded as one of the best science fiction films of all time, and probably the most influential. This collaboration with science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke tells the story of an alien intelligence that visited Earth in the distant past and left behind artifacts in the solar system. The movie features groundbreaking special effects which still hold up today. In fact, the effects looked so good that the movie gave the American government an idea. Billions of tax dollars were invested in the space program, but the Soviets were still years ahead of the United States. NASA desperately needed to get to the moon before Russia, but they knew it was impossible. So they turned to one of the world's best filmmakers for help. Because when it came to the moon, if they couldn't make it, they fake it. From the moment that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin set foot on the moon on July 20th, 1969, rumors were circulating that the whole thing was faked. Science journalist Richard C. Hoagland wrote in his 2007 book Dark Mission that he saw NASA press officers helping distribute flyers to the press saying the landing was faked. Even though the astronauts brought back hundreds of moon rocks and took thousands of photographs of the moon, some people simply didn't believe it. Considering the technology of the time, going to the moon and back sounded like science fiction. At one point, almost 30% of the American public believed the moon landings had been faked. In the 1971 movie Diamonds Are Forever, there's a sequence where Sean Connery as James Bond breaks into a warehouse, and there he finds government agents filming a fake moon landing sequence. He steals a weird-looking moon buggy to escape. And Capricorn 1 told the story of a fake mission to Mars.
As millions all over the world watched and listened, the President of the United States spoke to the astronauts across the vastness of space. There's only one small catch. It never happened. It's all a lie.
By the mid-2000s, the idea that the moon landings had been faked caught on with millennials who weren't alive for the Apollo missions. An extremely popular documentary was the Bart Sibrel film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon.
Oh, isn't that the guy that got punched out by Buzz Aldrin?
That's the guy.
You really like adventure, don't you? You're the one who said you walked on the moon when you didn't. Calling the kettle black, if I ever thought of it. Saying I misrepresented myself. Away from me. You're a coward and a liar and a thief.
At the time of the Apollo 11 mission, Buzz Aldrin was 32-degree Freemason. They were in good company, as many of NASA's astronauts were also Freemasons.
One of the ways we promote ourselves among Masons, a reason to join, is we consider ourselves a university of Freemasonry. And the real emphasis in the Scottish Rite is on receiving more light, learn more about the history of our world.
We always indulge in a few pagan rites to appease the EVA gods. These little ceremonies are very, very important to ensure mission success.
You want me to knock you in the head?
Well, I want you to swear to God on the Bible that you walked on the moon.
Okay.
If you walked on the moon, we're given the opportunity to swear to God that you walked on the moon.
I'm going to give you the opportunity to get the hell knocked out of you if you don't leave me alone.
So why don't you just put the end to the record in the argument and put your hand on the Bible, swear to God you walked on the moon.
Mr. Cybro, knowing you, that's probably a fake Bible.
Well, you're talking to the wrong guy. Why don't you talk to the administrator at NASA? We're passengers. We're guys going on a flight. I don't hit people, but you're going to be on the deck unless you... I understand. And get the hell out of the class. Well, I take your stuff and get the fuck out. Why don't you quote me and say it's bullshit?
When the shadows interact with... I don't give a damn about all that shit.
Of lunar orbit being falsified.
Being falsified?
Correct. We got an unedited tape from a source at the Johnson Space Center.
That's totally nonsense. Mr. Cybro, you do not deserve answers.
If you show this publicly, you're open for a lawsuit. Okay?
Let's talk about this, because this is fascinating. I remember very clearly, I think anybody who was alive at the time does, I remember my parents waking me up and we went down and we watched you guys land on the moon,
No, you didn't.
What?
Because there wasn't any television. There wasn't anybody taking a picture. You watched animation. So you associated what you saw with
I have very hazy memories. Well, no, but what we saw was we all were gathered around the old curved top radio and listened.
Talking about, how many feet we were going to the left and right, and then I said, contact light, engine stop.
It was exciting.
Other things, and then Neil said, Houston, Tranquility Base, the Eagle has landed. Man, how about that?
That was very exciting.
Not a bad line.
They just start making stuff up. Yeah. Like that Neil Armstrong guy. Have you seen him on the talk shows?
Neil Armstrong, you mean the first man to walk on the moon?
Talk about a fish story.
Yeah.
Man, and they're buying it.
Oh, yeah.
Bold claims require bold evidence. Is there evidence that the moon landing was faked? Lots of it.
Why has nobody been to the moon in such a long time?
That's not an 8-year-old's question. That's my question.
The motivation for faking the moon landings was driven by several factors. The United States was under tremendous pressure to get to the moon before the Soviets. The Soviet Union had already proven they were far ahead of the U.S. in space technology.
The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And it is one of the great adventures of all time. And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind.
The first multi-person crew, the first spacewalk, the first spacecraft to reach the moon, the first pictures of the far side of the moon, and even the first soft landing and transmission from the moon's surface. These were all Russian achievements. Meanwhile, America's attempts to catch up were not going well. Rumors started going around that the Russians were going to put nuclear weapons on the moon.
We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with instruments of knowledge.
So there was tremendous public pressure to get there first.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
On July 16th, 1969, Apollo 11 launched successfully. Four days later, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin set foot on the moon.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
In just a few years, the United States went from being years behind the Soviets in space exploration to eclipsing all of their achievements. To many people, this was just too good to be true. So skeptics started poring over photographs and film looking for evidence of a hoax. And the evidence was everywhere. The first clue of a hoax was that the astronauts seemed to be casting shadows in two different directions. But the sun is the only light source on the moon. On Earth, shadows run parallel. On the moon, not only did shadows go in different directions, but sometimes they were at right angles to each other. The only way to explain this is multiple light sources, like you'd get on a movie soundstage. Studio lights would also explain this shot. In a vacuum with only a single light source, the shadows on the moon should be absolutely, completely black. But there's a lot of film and photos where, even though the astronauts are in shadow, they're lit extremely well. Now, in the movies, the sun would be called a key light, which is your main light. And this light in the shadows would be from what's called a fill light. But there's no fill light on the moon, only a key light, the sun. There seems to be a Hollywood lighting technique happening here. Now, you're not going to find any direct evidence of studio lights in any pictures from the moon. NASA's too smart for that. But even in big budget movies, you can sometimes see the cameras and lights in reflections. Now look at this. In the reflection on the helmet, it looks like a neat row of movie lights. And look at the reflection on this photo.
What the heck is that?
That looks a lot like a studio light with the barn doors open. Now here's a photo that shows what looks like a movie prop. This rock is labeled with the letter C, but the crew forgot to remove the label when they started shooting. How about this picture of the landing module? Do those hills look like they're miles away, or do they look like this was shot on a soundstage? And speaking of those hills, this photo was supposedly taken a few miles away from the landing module. Then how come the backgrounds are identical?
Because they use the same backdrop.
Now let's talk about stars. On Earth, even with our thick atmosphere, the sky looks like this. But on the moon, with no air, the sky is just black? Shouldn't the sky be full of stars? NASA really thought this one through. If you're gonna hoax something in space, the stars are a big problem. This is because by using a star map, you can not only get the precise location a photo was taken, you can even get the precise day and time. So they had to get rid of the stars.
When you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare?
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics. I don't recall during the period of time that we were photographing the solar corona what stars we could see.
I don't remember seeing any.
Small problem. They use stars to help them navigate to the moon.
The astronaut navigator finds a known star in the wide-angle telescope. Using a fingertip control, he changes the attitude of the spacecraft to bring the star into line. Once he has the star in position in the telescope, he moves the optical sextant. He lines the sextant up with the star and makes a reading.
So are there stars or not? Which is it? There's a lot of evidence stacking up that doesn't look good for NASA or the moon landing. And we're just warming up.
NASA and the government faked the moon landing was basically, it was technically impossible to do it. And they simply had to come up with some sort of alternative that they felt the public would believe.
I believe, had they wanted to, that NASA could indeed have pulled off the greatest hoax of all time, never sent anyone to the moon, and recreated it in a television studio.
Can you realize that you and I, that all of us, have actually begun the exploration of another world?
The United States Geological Survey decided to build a model of one part of the lunar surface in an area accessible to present research centers.
4, 3, 2, 1, fire!
Reflections of studio lights, accidental movie props, repeating backdrops. There's a lot of evidence suggesting that the moon landing wasn't filmed on the moon, but on a soundstage. The lunar module engine puts out 3,000 pounds of thrust, and the lunar surface is covered with dust that was described as fine powder. If that's true, why did the engine leave no mark on the surface? And shouldn't there be dust everywhere? Even the footpads are clean and shiny. So either the landing module was sitting there, or it was gently lowered down by a crane. And you'd have to lower the thing gently. Look at it. It looks like tinfoil and curtain rods held together by duct tape. More evidence that a crane was used is when the astronauts separate from the module and return to orbit for pickup. Look at this. The module separates and the astronauts gently lift back to orbit. And look how slowly it moves. Where's the rocket plume from the engine? What's allowing this to fly all the way to orbit? If you watch the footage closely, it looks like the object is wobbling a little on cables or wires. By the way, who shot this footage? There was no camera remote control, but somehow the scene is framed perfectly. They're zooming in and out. The camera tracks the object up into the sky, but conveniently loses the object when it gets too high. But the camera does pan around the surface. Who's working the camera? Now, speaking of cables and wires, look at this footage.
The week in space. CBS News selective coverage of the mission of Gemini 9. Now the docking in space of Gemini 9 and its target vehicle. Reporting from the CBS News Space Center at the McDonnell Aircraft Plant in St. Louis, correspondent Walter Cronkite.
Yeah, okay. If I get on the instrument panel, I keep them coming out.
This is our simulation here in McDonnell. What's going on right now?
At 4 and F-16, huh? Strange world out here, you know? Yeah.
Listening to the conversation. conversation between Cernan, floating in space now outside of his capsule, as nearly as we can get to our indication, and with our simulation here, of course, is talking back to Stafford, and that radio command link.
Does this look natural? Or does it look like he's being lifted by wires?
Houston, Apollo 11, how do you read?
Apollo 11, this is Houston. Go ahead.
Lem looks to be in pretty fine shape. About all we can see from here.
Okay, in reference to your question on this step 13 on the decal, I understand that you have used up the contents of the repressed O2 package, and at that time, instead of being...
Then there's this footage of Neil and Buzz putting up the American flag. But if they were both on the moon's surface, who's shooting the footage? And how is the flag waving if there's no atmosphere on the moon? Now, sure, we've been told that there was an aluminum tube holding up the flag, but it seems to be moving around a lot. Now, here's a picture of what an Apollo astronaut spacesuit looked like. But look at the soles of the shoes. They don't look anything like the footprints the astronauts supposedly made in the lunar dust. And what about the heat? The surface temperature on the moon during the day is over 250 degrees Fahrenheit. That's as hot as an oven. The film inside their cameras should have melted. But there are thousands of pictures that all came out perfectly fine. There are plenty of photos that are flat out doctored. If you remember our episode on NASA's Mars cover-up, we proved that the photos of Mars were altered before being released to the public. This is a technique perfected during Apollo. The Apollo handheld cameras had special crosshairs on them called Rousseau marks, and these were here to help make sure the photos were printed properly from the negatives and not distorted, and to make it easier to stitch photos together for panoramas. But in some of the photos, the crosshairs aren't there, or are only in part of the picture. In other photographs, objects appear in front of the crosshairs. Now that's physically impossible, unless the objects were added after the photo was taken, by layering them on top of empty backgrounds. And there are even more problems with the photography. Here's a picture of an Apollo astronaut saluting the American flag. But look at his feet. The shadows don't even reach them. It's like he was edited in later and somebody forgot to add a shadow.
We see the ascent stage suddenly pop up without any exhaust plume whatsoever, as though it were jerked up by a cable.
Our research suggests that images of the Apollo landings are not a true and accurate record. In our view, the Apollo pictures were faked. Many of the images are replete with inconsistencies and anomalies.
There are problems with almost every aspect of the visual records, equipment, and technology used to supposedly put a man on the moon. But there's one even bigger problem we haven't dealt with yet. Well, the astronauts never left low Earth orbit. From there, the Earth fills the entire window of the craft.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with the TV camera, so your view now is probably better than ours is.
So to get this film of the Earth, they blocked out sections of the window. This film is an outtake. The astronauts didn't realize they were still rolling. They said the camera was pressed up against the window to get a good shot of the Earth, but that's not true. You can see someone pass in front of the window, then quickly jump out of the way. And here you see the dim work light that was used so they could operate the camera. We're not supposed to see this. We're also not supposed to see this. Someone adjusting the insert that controls the shape of the Earth. Now remember, they're in low Earth orbit, so the Earth is actually really bright and fills the whole window. How do we know? Because when they open up the iris of the lens, we can see it. Yeah, we can't pass through the Van Allen belts yet. Don't take my word for it. Take NASA's.
As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
I guess we're still working on solving this issue? Because I thought
But we're also really pushing the boundaries in terms of where we're going forward with exploration. I think Humans are naturally driven to do this, and this is really the beginning, I think, of human beings leaving low Earth orbit. I certainly plan on being around to see that.
I don't want to be a jerk because she seems like a nice girl, but newsflash, the moon is way outside low Earth orbit.
The plan that NASA has is to build a rocket called SLS, which is a heavy lift rocket. It's something that is much bigger than what we have today, and it will be able to launch the Orion capsule with humans on board, as well as landers or other components to destinations beyond Earth orbit. Right now, we only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. We only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. And this new system that we're building is going to allow us to go beyond and hopefully take humans into the solar system to explore. So the moon, Mars, asteroids, there's a lot of destinations that we could go to, and we're building these building block components in order to allow us to do that eventually.
Once we travel beyond low Earth orbit, the crew will be exposed to larger amounts of radiation. So we have to design both the crew protection systems and our electronic systems to withstand this radiation.
But didn't we already design those protection systems for Apollo? Why don't we just use that technology?
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
Wait, we destroyed the technology and we can't recreate it? So nobody wrote anything down? That seems irresponsible.
The thing that indicates the telemetry data is even in existence, and as I said, even if we had it, we don't have the machines to play it back.
But your old research has shown the telemetry data is missing.
That's right.
Could this be true? Mankind's first interplanetary exploration and the original science data is missing?
This film you're making now, what is it?
This is a film trying to prove that Apollo 11 happened.
Does it have a name? I mean, do you have a name for it yet, or you?
Did we go?
Did we go? Okay.
Doesn't have it either. The Smithsonian doesn't have it.
Right.
Doesn't.
Right. We've been unable to track it down. I mean, we don't know where this telemetry data ended up, and we don't know what path it may have taken. So, unfortunately, I'm afraid I can't really give you much of a clue as to where this data ended up and whether it still exists or not.
There are no original high-quality moon landing tapes. They were erased and reused.
Allegedly.
The footage we see of the moon landing was taken in a very strange way. NASA took a video feed from the moon and projected it onto a screen. Then TV stations pointed their cameras at the screen. The stations wanted a direct feed, but NASA refused. That's why the moon landing footage is such a mess. Anyway, the best way to protect a fragile human body from Van Allen radiation is lead shielding. But even a thin layer of lead would have made the Saturn V rocket too heavy to get off the ground. The only protection they had was a thin sheet of aluminum. But aluminum melts at about 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. The electrons in the Van Allen belts have energies of millions of volts. Now, this would equate to a temperature of about 10 million degrees Kelvin. So how did NASA overcome this problem? They didn't. Instead, they called Hollywood. Kubrick's Odyssey is a short film created by Jay Weidner in 2011. Recently, it gained attention after being picked up by the Gaia streaming network. This film is the primary reference for the theory that Stanley Kubrick filmed the moon landing footage for NASA in the 1960s and 70s. By 1964, NASA knew that sending men to the moon was impossible. The deadly radiation belts, issues with chemical rockets, and weight and radiation shielding issues, it made it unachievable. Kubrick became involved when someone in the Pentagon saw his 1963 film, Dr. Strangelove. Impressed by the special effects, this person offered Kubrick a secret project, faking the Apollo moon landings. Kubrick was persuaded using a carrot and stick approach. If he helped fake the landings, he would have artistic freedom and financial support for his future films. That's the carrot. The stick was blackmail.
No one knows how the powers that be convinced Kubrick to direct the Apollo landings. Maybe they had compromised Kubrick in some way. The fact that his brother, Raoul Kubrick, was the head of the American Communist Party may have been one of the avenues pursued by the government to get Stanley to cooperate.
So a deal was made in 1964. Kubrick was given 3 years to complete 2001 in order to test the filmmaking technology necessary to make the moon landings appear believable. To assist him, he had access to several NASA experts and the use of a special 50mm lens made specifically for the Apollo program.
Originally was a lens manufactured, designed, developed, and manufactured by Zeiss for NASA.
So how did he do it? Without the use of CGI, Kubrick perfected a new kind of visual effect called front screen projection. Experimentation with front screen projection began in 1949, shortly after the invention of Scotchlight, a material used for screens in movie theaters. Scotchlight is cloth embedded with millions of tiny glass beads that have high reflectivity. Due to the sensitivity of Scotchlight, a minimal amount of light is required. This means that actors can stand in front of the projection without it being visible on their bodies or clothing. Front screen projection was so convincing that many people think the Dawn of Man sequences in 2001 were actually shot on location. They weren't. Almost all that part of 2001 was shot in a studio with actors on sets. If you look closely at Apollo photographs of the moon, you can see a line where the fake moon set ends and the front projection screen begins. At that line, the texture of the lunar surface changes dramatically.
Please note how everything is in focus, from the rocks and pebbles close to the camera, all the way to the crystal clear mountain behind the astronaut. There is a stark difference in ground texture between the set and what is being projected onto the screen. You can almost count the number of small rocks and the granularity of the ground that is clearly seen on the set. Once we get to the screen on the other side of my line, this granularity disappears. The little pebbles and dust just seem to disappear behind my line.
The latter part of Kubrick's Odyssey discusses the hidden messages in The Shining that Kubrick directed in 1980. Kubrick leaves clues that he faked the moon landings. The characters Jack and Danny, who are the father and son in the movie, symbolize different aspects of Kubrick's own personality. Danny, the child, represents Kubrick's inner innocence, while Jack represents the jaded and morally compromised adult that Kubrick has become. There are also specific visual clues. The Indian wall hangings on the walls of the Overlook Hotel look like rockets launching into space. The pattern on the carpet of the hotel is a hexagonal shape that represents the shape of the launch pads at Cape Canaveral. And in one scene, when Danny is playing with his toys on this carpet, he stands up and is seen wearing a sweater that says Apollo 11 on it. Then there's the scene where Jack's wife discovers that he's been typing the same phrase over and over. The phrase is, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." But the word all isn't ALL. It's actually typed out as A11 or Apollo 11. And there are a lot of other claims made by Kubrick's Odyssey, but those are the highlights. And these claims were highly debated and very controversial. What we need is Kubrick admitting he faked the moon landing. We need to hear it from his own mouth, but he never said a word about it. Or did he? In 2016, an interview with Stanley Kubrick was found. And according to the video, Kubrick had to sign an 88-page non-disclosure agreement that the interview would stay hidden for 15 years.
Is everything looking in order regarding our contract and the 15-year agreement, and I signed the non-disclosure? That's all for the legal stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Looks good to me.
All right.
The Stanley Kubrick moon landing confession set the conspiracy side of the internet on fire, but it was a hoax. This is either a filmmaker and an actor, or more likely, two guys goofing around. In the full-length version of the interview, an agitated producer constantly badgers the actor whose real name is Tom.
A launch pad accident in '67, which killed...
Tom, you're going to tell me a story. So Nixon sat me down in the Oval Office, and he says to me, you know, that boy just died on the thing. This is how I want you... Then we're going to kneel. We're going to kneel. Yeah.
The plan. He didn't... Yeah.
So he says to me, you don't say he said anything. You say what he says, okay? That's all, Tom. I'm just giving you an introduction.
You want me?
Everything about I walked in and he said.
You want me to say it as him, or do you want?
You don't have to imitate him, but you have to say. He says, Stanley, we've worked on this moon program.
Come on, get with it, Tom.
Do your shtick. Do a shtick. Get in the fact that you're writing this, Tom, and not everything's got to be drab. It can be funny in a very subtle way. So you meet with Nixon, and what happened? Grab a drink and action.
What they believed was, if we could...
Nixon sat down. Color, tell me a story, Tom.
So Stanley Kubrick had nothing to do with that interview. Is NASA covering something up on the moon? Definitely.
My name is Carl Wolf, and I was a precision electronics photographic repairman with a top secret crypto clearance in mid-1965, I was loaned to the Lunar Orbiter Project at NASA on Langley Field. I was taken into the laboratory where the equipment was malfunctioning. I couldn't repair it in the dark. I asked to have it removed. A Airman second class was in the dark room at that time. I was also an Airman second class. About 30 minutes into the process, he said to me, in a very distressed way, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he proceeded to put photographs down in front of me, and clearly in these photographs were structures, mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical buildings, and towers. And at that point, I was very concerned because I knew we were working on compartmentalized security. He had breached security, and I was actually frightened at that moment. And I did not question him any further. And a few moments later, someone did come into the room. I worked there for 3 more days, and I remember going home and naively thinking, I can't wait to hear about this on the evening news. And here it is, more than 30 years later, and I hope we hear about it tonight. And I will testify under oath before Congress that what I'm saying is the truth.
I think the reason we haven't returned to the moon for 50 years is not because of a lack of interest or funding or the Van Allen radiation belts. I think we haven't gone back to the moon because of what was found up there. But that requires its own episode, and if you want to see it, let me know. Whatever is up there has been up there for a long, long time. And I think we can prove it. Look, we don't know for sure what's at the center of the Earth, much less what's at the center of the moon.
If there's anything at all.
Right. Now, the structures are said to be shadows or optical illusions.
Nope.
And the lights are from meteor impacts or reflections from glassy patches on the surface.
Nope.
But the bottom line is this. Yes, the hollow moon spaceship theory is a wild one, I admit that. And many of the anomalies found on the moon can be explained. The explanations aren't perfect, but they're enough to satisfy skeptics. And I consider myself a skeptic, but I'm open-minded. I just want to know the truth. And when I started researching this story, I thought it would be a fun ride, a pure tinfoil hat experience that we could button up with science. That's not what happened. There's just so much unknown and unexplainable that something doesn't feel right about what we've been told about the moon. But as always, the space agencies and the governments they serve are very selective about the images and information they release. So I have a message for them. For NASA, the European Space Agency, Russia, China, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, and anyone with the resources to put people back on the moon. The message is this: if you want us to believe your explanations, you're gonna have to prove it.
Going forward, just know that I have no in particular direction on any subject that I choose, so if some information's making you go sour and you want to stop watching, I suggest you just hold on and listen to the information until the end so you have it. It could come in handy in the future. So the Y Files is absolutely amazing. I love that guy. He's informative. He hits the punchlines. We don't agree on 100% of things, but probably 95% of things, and I cut those clips so that way they would fit this documentary without being too long. Definitely go back, look up the full videos, check them out. So the really solid research aspects of the moon that you're going to enjoy that really are bulletproof are: one, all the crater depths where they should be deeper than others. If there's a bigger impact from a bigger meteor than another, there should be a deeper hole the wider the hole is, and that all of them being the same, very compelling, very hard to explain. And number two, the CGI photos, they're everywhere in space, everywhere in NASA, everywhere, including the moon. They're everywhere, literally. Number three, the moon ringing like a bell, very verifiable, and that's definitely a thing that's very compelling. Number four, the video where they're in orbit and they're looking at the Earth was never disproven. When they move away from the window, and you can definitely see they're messing around. If you think about it, if they really are who I'm about to explain them as being, this is them literally playing a joke on us, just literally on a movie set, laughing, giggling, not even putting too much effort in because they know or they think we're so stupid. And number five, I'm sure you can agree that it's pretty compelling that they claim that they destroyed or lost the technology and forgot how to get to the moon. Like, how ridiculous. Like, literally he's grinning while he's saying it. It's insane. It's the dumbest thing. And finally, number six, these aircrafts are so flimsy. There's been interviews with the engineer showing off the aircraft where he can't even explain how it's airtight and is still able to be operated from the inside. Not even to mention that it looks like it's made out of the lightest aluminum foil that you could buy in a supermarket. And they literally admit that it's aluminum foil, which, as explained earlier, just cannot handle the temperatures that they explained it would be put through. Now, aspects that they claim are debunked via science are the light seen on the moon apparently are just reflections of light. Apparently that the sky not having stars is just that they had their camera on a setting where you couldn't see the small brightness of the stars because it was so bright on the moon. They said that the reason why you can't see any tracks from the lunar lander is because the thrusters shut off and it just floated down like a feather to the ground. The answer to the question of who shot the footage is that the video was on a remote controlled apparatus in which they were filming remotely. They said that the flag moving on the moon when there's no wind was just because of the springs in the flag. And lastly, they said that the footprints on the moon didn't match the shoes of the astronauts because the astronauts put on these shoe covers while they were walking on the moon. And the reason why I don't subscribe to any of these things in which they debunked with science is because the science they're debunking it with is literally coming from the criminals, the perpetrators, that we're trying to say are perpetuating the crime. Just keep in mind that NASA and DARPA literally created the internet. Look that up. You can Google it. You can only imagine the filter that they have on the internet that we just never get to see. There's probably some things out there, some evidence that they just remove before it even gets to us. They control the internet. They control the information, and that's why they want to go 100% digital. We're running out of time to expose these people. And yes, the Stanley Kubrick footage was faked, but that just leads to more questions. It's almost like the Animal Planet Mermaid mockumentary they did, but so much time and money into it, but we're going to get into that later. So not only do they do psychological operations to distract you, but they do psychological operations to cover things up, which tie into rituals, which ties into Satanism, which ties into the Nazis. Definitely get deeper into the CGI fake photos that NASA creates. They literally copy and paste clouds.
In 2002, Blue Marble 2.0, NASA's Rob Simon made this, and it had wide appeal too. For example, it ended up as the default background on the iPhone.
I didn't even know until I bought an iPhone and turned it on and kind of did a little happy dance.
Simon's job is...
It's primarily taking data and making pictures out of it.
That's what this is, a composite of data sets from several different instruments translated into a picture.
To us, the really cool thing was the data set. Up until that point, there was no realistic color map of the globe anywhere.
So the land layer here comes from
the moderate resolution imaging spectroradiometer aboard Terra.
And the tricky part here was the weather.
So we actually had to take clouds out.
They stashed the clouds for later, went onto the ocean. That came from an instrument that measures phytoplankton in the sea.
Where it was low, I colored it dark blue because they're low mostly in mid-oceans. And then where it's a little bit higher, it was like a little bit brighter green.
Then add the clouds back in.
There's a small problem with it because there's a very slight gap in between each orbit.
So some of those are painted on.
It is photoshopped, but it's has to be.
Then
there was another layer to sort of simulate the atmosphere.
And then there's this little bright spot.
It's called the specular highlight. So it's the reflection of sunlight off of water.
Those are the pieces, but you can't just slap them all together.
It just didn't look realistic. It looks kind of flat, or the clouds are sort of too see-through. So I just hit Command Z a lot.
There's artistry to creating the world.
What I imagine it to be. Unfortunately, I'm not an astronaut. I've never been to space, but I've looked at these images over and over again, trying to sort of get the essence of it. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be.
And regarding the moon ringing, check out the classified Chapel Bell classified Department of Defense test in 1917.
The signal seemed to be going back and forth inside the moon, almost like it was a bell that was ringing. And it went on for an hour, and no one has been able to understand why.
The moon rang like a bell? The discovery came as a shock, and it opened the door to new, thought-provoking possibilities.
The oscillations lasted for a very long time, much longer than we expected. And that's surprising fundamentally because we're just really used to the way the Earth vibrates. And the moon just behaves differently, and it let us know that the structure of the moon is very different than the structure of the Earth. Some people thought that might mean the moon is hollow.
The moon basically resonated, and to put it the way NASA put it, it rang like a bell, which doesn't really make any sense if the moon is solid. Now, this can only happen if there were vast empty spaces inside the moon, where these sound waves would be bouncing around for hours and hours afterwards. It was not a result they expected. So it's possible what we're looking at here is that there are interior portions of the moon which are hollowed out.
Did the Apollo 12 mission actually reveal that the moon is hollow? While that may sound like a far-fetched notion, many researchers believe that the answer is yes. And for further evidence, they point to a classified experiment that was conducted on the Apollo 17 mission in 1972.
On Apollo 17, there was a NASA experiment called Chapel Bell, which was classified. If you think about the name Chapel Bell, it implies something to do with sound waves and the ringing of a bell. But nobody knows what Chapel Bell is. It's 50 years later. The test itself is still classified. There's a lot of secrecy that seems unnecessary, especially 50 years later. It doesn't make any sense. The only reason it makes sense for the Chapel Bell experiment, the separate experiment, to be classified is if the results were something extraordinary, something unexpected, and something that implied that the moon was far, far different than NASA had been telling us.
What was the Chapel Bell experiment? And what were its results? Could it have provided more evidence to suggest that the moon is hollow? And if so, has NASA deliberately withheld this information for 50 years?
Very mysterious. It's almost as mysterious as the fact that we can never see the dark side of the moon. It always has its back to us, and that's kind of sketchy. So NASA literally was created on deception. Literally created by a Nazi, Werner von Braun. You can look this up. He was brought over here in Operation Paperclip. This is real, Googleable, where 1,600 Nazi scientists were brought over because they had valuable research information in which they obtained by committing war crimes. And these Nazis were placed all throughout the United States government, and that's probably why the DoD was busted with 1,600 plus child porn cases literally surrounding the Pentagon. Operation Flicker. So NASA, pronounced in Hebrew as Na-Sha, literally means to deceive, or mentally delude, or morally seduce, according to the King James Bible Concordance. And it's definitely very strange that some people speculate that the red V on the side of the NASA logo is actually a snake tongue. Is it a stretch? I don't know. I mean, it's very clear and apparent. NASA has even made so many mistakes on their live feed. You can even see wires in some cases. Sometimes water doesn't move. Their CGI messes up. Check out these clips.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Today I'd like to bring to your attention a potential fraud on an enormous scale happening in York County. There's now clear evidence of NASA using numerous methods to grossly mislead the public about astronauts being on the International Space Station. During interior ISS scenes from NASA's own live feed, the use of wires, harnesses, green screens, and virtual reality have been detected to achieve the appearance of a weightless environment. Examples of this include astronauts fading in and out of the screen, green screen glitches, grabbing objects that aren't really there, pulling on invisible wires, getting tangled in their harnesses, and even astronauts appearing out of thin air. This begs the obvious question. If they're really up there, why are they using Hollywood techniques to fake the footage? Now, unfortunately, I can't show you these clips in here today, but I will be sending them to you.
Hi, I'm Noah. I'm in second grade. Could you show a somersault right now?
But when those guys were playing ping pong back and forth with the water, you'll notice that the girl always is looking above the camera. And the reason why is because they're looking at the CGI feed. You know, they need to see where the item is that they're playing ping pong with because it's not right in front of them. They appear to be watching a monitor above the camera.
You'll have a chance for showers or thunderstorms, and also little disturbances rumbling along this thing will bring us a chance for rain. Expect rain to be heavy at times, especially this evening, and then once again late tonight, so be prepared for that. 40% chance for rain. Showers or thunderstorms, and also little disturbances rumbling along this thing will bring us a chance for rain. Expect rain to be heavy at times, especially this evening, and then once again late tonight, so be prepared for that. 40% chance for rain.
Outside the International Space Station, during spacewalks, air bubbles have been reported on numerous occasions. How is it possible for air bubbles to be present in the vacuum of space? I once questioned astronaut Scott Kelly about this phenomenon. His body language and answers only created more questions. In 2013, astronaut Luca Parmitano nearly drowned during a spacewalk when his helmet filled with water. This happened again just last year. Air bubbles, helmets filling with water, and drowning. Are they in space or are they underwater? Now, what's really interesting is that they trained for spacewalks in an underwater pool with a complete ISS replica. Now, surely they aren't filming these spacewalks in an underwater pool and then editing them to appear if they're in space, because that sure would be something, wouldn't it? I'm calling on the Brevard County Commissioners to open a full investigation into NASA's fraudulent practices and use of taxpayer dollars. It costs NASA $3 billion per year to operate the ISS, and if they don't have a darn good explanation as to why they're faking these videos, I and the public would like a darn good explanation as to where our tax money is going. And if they are indeed faking the funk, it is our duty to expose and eliminate this fraudulent and astronomically wasteful ISS program. And look, I know what you're all thinking. The NASA is part of the federal government, and you're just county commissioners. Even if what I'm saying is true, what can you do? But let me remind you, not only is this happening in your county, as public officials, you have the platform and the ability to make a statement or hold a press conference, alerting the public, state, and federal authorities to investigate further. You have the power to start the conversation. Video evidence of everything I described today will be emailed to you all, and I truly hope we can get to the bottom of this. I look forward to the day that $3 billion annual budget is put towards our veterans, our homeless.
Another crazy thing to look up is the fact that all of their rockets never go straight up, they always curve. a lot of people speculate that they never leave space and they just curve down and nobody sees where they go. Which leads me to obviously say sometimes you can see them skipping on what looks like water in the sky. And this video has always really baffled me. These people shot an amateur rocket up into the sky with a GoPro, and it looks like it gets stuck in water.
Rockets don't have brakes. It literally stopped. All of that angular momentum from the rotation of the rocket and the linear momentum from flying up just stopped. No, it hit something. If it hit a solid surface, the rocket would have been destroyed. Most likely the camera too, so we wouldn't have the footage. And obviously that's not the case.
One thing I really want your generation to embrace is that the Earth is a closed system. We cannot leave the Earth. There's no place to go.
This had belonged to my mother. Actually, my uncle had bought it for me, and my mother kept it for many years. And it has books that I've never seen, and I've studied the King James Bible for years, the newer ones. But everyone's talking about how they are changing the Bible now. And I thought, well, this could be a good reference to go by. I just came across this. It tells the days of the week. And it says the first day of the week is Sunday, second Monday, third Tuesday, fourth Wednesday, fifth Thursday, sixth Friday, and seventh day or Sabbath day is on Saturday. And this is written in 1829. But we are not going by that time frame now. I guess a lot has changed. This part is talking about the firmament, how God divided the waters. Says the waters under were gathered together into one place, and then there's waters above.
Where the Mercator fails is its representation of size. Look at the size of Africa as compared to Greenland. On the Mercator map, they look about the same size. But if you look at a globe for Greenland's true size, you'll see that it's way smaller than Africa. By a factor of 14, in fact. If we put a bunch of dots onto the globe that are all the same size, and then project that onto the Mercator map, we will end up with this. The circles retain their round shape, but are enlarged as they get closer to the poles. One modern critique of this is that the distortion perpetuates imperialist attitude of European domination over the southern hemisphere.
Should we begin?
Yes. Plain and simple, we'd like President Bartlett to aggressively support legislation that would make it mandatory for every public school in America to teach geography using the Peters projection map instead of the traditional Mercator.
Give me $200 and it's done.
Really?
No. Why are we changing maps?
The map enlarges areas at the poles to create straight lines of constant bearing or geographic direction.
So it makes it easier to cross an ocean.
But
yes,
it distorts the relative size of nations and continents.
Are you saying the map is wrong?
Oh dear, yes. Look at Greenland.
Okay.
Now look at Africa.
Okay.
The two land masses appear to be roughly the same size.
Yes.
Would it blow your mind if I told you that Africa is in reality 14 times larger?
Yes.
Here we have Europe drawn considerably larger than South America. When it's 6.9 million square miles, South America is almost double the size of Europe's 3.8 million.
Alaska appears 3 times as large as Mexico, when Mexico is larger by 0.1 million square miles.
Germany appears in the middle of the map when it's in the northernmost quarter of the Earth.
Wait.
relative size is one thing, but you're telling me that Germany isn't where we think it is?
Nothing's where you think it is.
Where is it?
I'm glad you asked. The Peters projection.
It has fidelity of axis.
Fidelity of position.
East-west lines are parallel and intersect north-south axes at right angles.
What the hell is that?
It's where you've been living this whole time. Should we continue?
Uh-huh.
So if you want to see a map that more accurately displays land area, you can use the Gall-Peters projection. This is called an equal area map. Look at Greenland and Africa now. The size comparison is accurate, much better than the Mercator. But it's obvious now that the country shapes are totally distorted. Here are those dots again so that we can see how the projection preserves area while totally distorting shape.
Guys, remember how I showed you the maps that were here on Earth before 1958, before the governments took them out? Now I'm going to show you the Encyclopedia Britannicas in the public libraries before 1958. Here's volume 2 out of the alphabet A. And we're going to flip to the Antarctica, which, and this is from 1958, as you can see, featureless in character with a dome 13,000 feet high at about latitude 80 degrees south, longitude 90 degrees east. Take a really, really close look at that. Now I'm going to zoom it in for you. When they returned to New Zealand, these flights proved the inland areas to be featureless in character with a dome 13,000 feet high at about latitude 80 degrees south, longitude 90 degrees east.
Of these craters.
So I bought a Nikon P1000, one of the best cameras you can get with the most zoom, just to look at the moon. Patterns on the moon don't look like they're random. They look familiar. And then so I started to do some research about the moon possibly being a map of the Earth. Check this out. People have already done research on it, and just check out what I found here. This is mind-blowing stuff. And whenever they try to hide anything from you, they'll throw it in some sort of media, like a commercial or a movie. And it's just crazy that Hennessy included a firmament commercial out of nowhere for no reason. Now getting into the deepest part of the moon, the craziest, deepest part of the black rabbit hole. Not only do some patents reflect that the moon could be a hologram, but also that the sun could be artificially created. A combination of different theories, one of which that thinks that the moon is plasma, say that it's a shadow, or better yet, a projection of Earth on the dome or the firmament.
Well, now, one thing, you have a theory about the moon, and we expect to be able to get observable facts about the moon fairly soon. What is your theory?
Well, it is by now rather more than a theory. 10 or 11 years ago, I stated to various scientists that the moon is not a piece of rock, but it is a plasma phenomenon, cosmic plasma, and that this fact will eventually be confirmed. I made certain predictions which were already confirmed in 1958, and the situation now is coming close to a complete confirmation.
What will be the result if you're proved to be correct in your theories?
The result will be profound and decisive because it will give proof that a complete reinvestigation of the laws of nature is necessary. Because if the moon is a plasma, no man will ever land on it. The soft landing attempts will all fail. That means that the mass of the moon is less, far less than is currently assumed. It's in a different state of energy and it has far less mass. That means there is no more explanation for the tides. If the moon, for example, had only 1,000th part of its current mass, then the tides would only be 2 inches high under conventional theories instead of sometimes 14 feet. And that means that if it is proved that the moon is a plasma, then all gravitational theories are out and a new concept of the cosmos and of its laws has to be evolved. Scientific views expressed all over the world now that the moon seems to be of a quite different nature of what was assumed.
But the Americans and Russians are thinking of landing men on it.
Well, that will never happen. Not on the moon. On Mars, on Venus, on other planets, yes, but the moon is definitely, as I assert, a plasma.
They say that this is an X-ray projection in the exahertz spectrum. They say that this is from the black sun that the Nazis were worshipping. They even had a logo that represented the black sun. In occult beliefs, they believe that the black sun is at the center of the earth in some place called Agartha. It's also called other names. And that symbol that the Nazis used for the black sun in the center, it actually looks like Katt's chain. Yep. Now, some people say the Freemason logo is the way it is because it's actually representing a secret symbol of what's really going on. The secret symbol of the black sun being below, which is black sun negative, exahertz, X-ray, and up top is the red sun, which is UV in the petahertz spectrum, which is positive. So we have the positive above, negative below. Strange that the Freemasons always say, as above, so below. And people speculate that we're called humans because we are actually on the spectrum right below the sun, and our cells vibrate at the same frequency as light. And if you do a little bit of research, you'll understand that the LEDs, the new lighting that has been rolled out, that everybody got a discount on, that is actually causing damage to us because that's how sensitive we are to light, just like plants.
The administration's ban on incandescent bulbs and halogen bulbs starting August 1st, 2023. I think this is really important, right? We've had these bulbs since the dawn of time, basically since the 1900s. They're very soothing, they're very relaxing. If you like to read a book, you just turn on a lamp with the incandescent and you can read that book just fine. But these LED bulbs, on the other hand, in which they want to have in every home, can actually cause anxiety and restlessness. They can mess with your melatonin levels inside your brain. They're actually linked to blindness, which is crazy when you get into the studies. They also flicker like crazy, and they also emit microwave radiation. That's what they want to bring into our home. LED bulbs that are emitting microwave radiation. On top of that, when you get really weird, you get into the smart bulbs. The smart bulbs can actually sync up to your phone, sync up to your Alexa, sync up to your stove, to your fridge, to all your devices in which they can use to monitor you.
Tell me what's happened in the last 200 years.
What do you mean?
Just the last 200 years, like a quick rundown. I know about the Great War and the bombs falling and the 320 years of American history before then. I just need help with the last 200 years, after the bombs fell.
The bombs fell when I was a kid.
Is that what they tell you in your brotherhood? Look, I come from a place where the world is what you make of it. Okay, it's not like up here. We're naive down there. Up until I was 6, I really thought that the big light on our farm was the sun. My mom used to take me to play out under that light, and I swear I could feel the sun baking my skin, you see. After my mom was gone, I realized it was just her that made it all feel so real.
It was a sequence of contact reports on the top left shield quadrant, which by 1700 had turned into a minor asteroid storm. None bigger than a raindrop, but we had 19 punctures and a secondary contact to the engine compartment. It took 3 Alpha shifts to patch it up. Lost a little weight, but nothing serious. Gotta tell you, Moonbase, it was beautiful.
Our sun is dying. Mankind faces extinction. 7 years ago, the Icarus Project sent a mission to restart the sun. But that mission was lost before it reached the star. 16 months ago, I, Robert Capa, and a crew of 7 left Earth frozen in a solar winter. Our payload, a stellar bomb with a mass equivalent to Manhattan Island. Our purpose, to create a star within a star. Astronauts strapped to the back of a bomb. Just remember, it takes 8 minutes for light to travel from sun to Earth, which means you'll know we've succeeded about 8 minutes after we deliver the payload. All you have to do is look out for a little extra brightness in the sky. So if you wake up one morning and it's a particularly beautiful day, you'll know we made it. Okay, Chris, I want you to run the math on the successful delivery of payload.
Okay, payload delivery point reached.
Detach the payload.
Stellar bomb initiated and detached. Crew and living section have 4 minutes to clear and commence homeward journey.
And 4 minutes after separation, boosters automatically fire.
Payload boosters will automatically fire after 4-minute delay. Entering coronal hole in south polar cap. Magnetic field structure open. Temperature 37,000 degrees. Reliability of projection has dropped below 45%. Remaining projection is not open to useful speculation. Variables infinite. Accuracy unknown.
That's the problem right there. Between the boosters and the gravity of the sun, the velocity of the payload will become so great, space and time will become smeared together. Everything will distort, everything will be unquantifiable. We've mined all Earth's fissile materials for this bomb. There's not going to be another payload. The one we carry is our last chance. Our last, best hope.
So after the solar eclipse, I was abnormally tired and had a bunch of anxiety during it, but I usually keep my cool, and I was ready for anything. And everybody around me had anxiety, and I've asked a bunch of people, they had anxiety, and they all took a nap right after. And I'm telling you, it's a thing. Look it up. A lot of people were tired after.
So we all just collectively took a nap after the eclipse. I made a post on Facebook saying, who all took a nap after the eclipse? Me and my kids were knocked out, and I know we were not the only ones. And of course, by the comments, we weren't the only ones. And baby, when I tell you we were sleeping good, we were sleeping good. My stepmama even tagged me in a post that had like 182 shares. And that one said that eclipse must have had some melatonin in it, because baby, it did. That dude at the top was like, nah, it had like 8 Xanax in it. I ain't never been this drained. Like, ever been this drained.
So a lot of people have been saying the sun looks really bright, abnormally bright. I agree. It looks more white. That's what people are saying as well. I agree. Some people have taken some crazy photos and they're saying some crazy things.
Oh, wow. Whoa, look at that.
It done around. Or the sun coming forward.
Why am I seeing? Oh, we have an artificial sun. You see? Do you guys see the little orb that's flying around? That's the reflection of the camera lens. Well, you see those pixelated things? I think this is proof that this sun is fake. The real one is behind it. They did not want us to see something. That's what happened.
Y'all, our sun is not real. Check it out. We're gonna do it right here in Las Vegas, right? We're at the Palms. So you can see this is our sun today. That little ball right there, the direct reflection of the sun, is about to show you guys something, one of the scariest things probably you'll ever see in your life in real time. Check it out. This is the reflection that we're getting of the sun. The direct reflection that is the sun in its current shape and form. So, excuse me, what kind of a disco ball we got in the sky, yo? Because that is not my sun, your sun, or any kind of sun that we have known up until now. This is the picture I took earlier this week in Elko, Nevada. This is our sun, the sun, and then this down here is a direct reflection with like a, I don't know, it's got like geometric shapes in it, like hexagons. This is not our sun. This is what an artificial sun looks like. I also thought it was very strange in my original pictures from earlier this week in Elko. I looked closer at my picture of the sun itself and even the rays. And y'all, when I say I was shook, I was shook. Look closer at the sun itself. Y'all, come on now. This is an absolute no filter picture of the sun in Elko, Nevada. I believe it was Tuesday or Wednesday of this week. Look at the sun and even inside of the rays. Yo, what is that, mesh? A little bit closer of a look for you. So I messed with the contrast. Check out this next picture. Okay, all right. I'm done. I'm tapping out 2024. This was not on my bingo card. A whole artificial sun. There it is up even closer. Guys, what? So just now I took that video with you guys here in Las Vegas. This is the reflection of the sun here today. We've been down here for Cheer Choice Awards, and at the pool party, me and a few of my followers, we took videos and pictures of the sun. And oh, shock face, same thing. But I will say in Vegas, it seems to be a little bit brighter and kicked up a notch.
I decided to take it into the editor and look at this, you guys. Play with the, contrasts and all that stuff. Well, I be dang, what does that look like, guys? There is, without a doubt, you guys, a sun simulator in front of our sun.
Photograph
a hexagon appeared in the upper left-hand corner. He didn't notice this hexagon until many weeks after the fact. He sent it to me to look at. I kind of compared it to the sun simulator because it does have similarities. But we don't know for sure what we're dealing with here. It almost looks like there's two. If you look at it real close, you can see an outline of one here to the left. Kind of neat. Don't know what it is, but it does have an uncanny resemblance to the sun simulator right there. See that? So that's a perfect match, at least structurally, with what we saw in South Dakota. Another hexagon. Only this time it appears to be moving in the center of the sun. I've never seen anything like that. I've seen hundreds, probably thousands of pictures of the sun and sky over the years, and that's a first. Gotta admit, that's a first. This one here was very unique also. This is the one from the monument in South Dakota, Crazy Horse, South Dakota. And you can see there almost appears to be two, but definitely one.
On the FAA camera, we can see it actually being used here. This can be dimmed up and dimmed down as they see fit. Again, here, this is the patent. The light is generated, it bounces back on the mirror, reflects back through the parabolic mirror, goes through the hole, bounces onto this spinning Fresnel lens, which is that black spot you see in the sky, and this bounces out to the Earth. This is what we see. And because the source of light is hexagonal, the sun is hexagonal.
In fact, not only do I suggest that you go out and take video and pictures of the sun yourself, y'all, I challenge you, because you're going to find the same thing. That up there is not our sun. It is a whole A artificial sun.
So they're saying this image of the blue sphere looks like the sun could be artificial and this could be proof. So I obviously went out and got a different camera to make sure it wasn't some sort of reflection of an internal component in the device. So when I was taking photos, I definitely found some weird things. I found some things that looked like orbs or possibly resembled portals. I even found what looks like a little baby sun behind our sun, which was definitely very intriguing. So for these photos, I use my Nikon P1000. It's got a very high zoom. And when I'm looking at these photos and even a video that I took, zooming in, adjusting the levels, I do not see anything that these people found. Number one, the blue orb does not look like there's that array. And number two, I can't get the sun to show anything crazy except for this one picture, and this could be just the device's limits. It just can't process pictures past this point because it's so bright. And then that brings me to the other thing. When somebody has a phone and they're adjusting it on their phone, there's no way that phone could capture that much light and process it without some sort of filter. Just remember, there was this article where the Samsung phones, when they zoomed into the moon, everyone thought it could zoom all the way up to the moon, but really it was an artificial thing and it wasn't really doing it, and they got sued over it. Yeah, look into that. So I was so intrigued by that blue orb looking just like the patent, that little array of lights. So I did a little bit of digging to see if I could find the diagram or the schematics of the iPhone or other cell phone lenses. And I found something called the micro lens array, and it literally looks just like this reflection. So the fact that I didn't get it on my camera and the fact they're getting it on theirs, I believe that this is specifically a cell phone thing and it's an internal reflection. That being said, I did capture what looked like a sun behind this, and based on that movie, it looks like they're telling us. Strange enough, this eclipse on April 8th, 2024, the sun does not look the same. It looks white. It looks like an incandescent bulb was just updated to an LED. It doesn't feel right. It feels colder and it's brighter. and it's whiter instead of orange. Another aspect about the eclipse, I got a lot of anxiety at the peak of it, and so did a lot of people around me and a lot of people that I've asked about it. I was really tired. I passed out, went to sleep that night, felt like I ran all day or something. Everybody else was tired, and we've all been tired since then. And if you look it up, the Schumann resonance skipped for an hour. So usually you can look up, there's always this resonance from the Earth. It's the Earth's resonance. It stopped for an entire hour. Yes, stopped for an entire hour. Did the world end? Did it shift? Did the pole shift? I have no idea. It's almost like they literally changed the bulb in the sun. Another mind-prying aspect of this, all the way around us at all times, is called the ether. Just like fish don't know they're in water, apparently we're in some sort of substance called the ether, we just don't know we're in. The ether would be the positive and the negative would be the water that's all the way around the earth, and that's why you can ground when you touch the ground. It's the air that's the positive, the ground is the negative, and that same water, the same ground that are touching each other that ground you, is what the firmament is made out of. And that's the positive and negative, as above, so below. It all connects.
What Tesla was saying is that matter is absorbing energy all of the time. So that's what gravity is. So if we're absorbing ether all of the time, the reason we fall back to the earth when we jump up is not because we're attracted to the earth, but because we're in the way of the influx of the tremendous amount of energy that the earth needs to absorb the ether. Now, there are four forces to the universe. There's something called the strong nuclear force, which is holding the nucleus together. The weak nuclear force holds neutrons together. The neutrons are inside the nucleus. Electromagnetism holds molecules together. And then gravity, what the heck is gravity? Three of those forces have been combined. Mathematically, they've been able to combine the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and electromagnetism. Einstein spent the last 30 years of his life looking for grand unification. How can you combine gravity with the other three forces? I'm going to do it in the next minute. If all matter is absorbing ether all of the time, take an electron. Electron is spinning around and it's spinning around the nucleus, and it's spinning around its own axis, spinning around the nucleus. How does that thing keep spinning? What Tesla is saying is the reason it keeps spinning is because it's absorbing energy all the time. It's a standing waveform. Where does that energy go? That energy is translated into electromagnetism. That's grand unification. So you have gravity, which is the absorption of ether by all elementary particles. My body's absorbing ether. Books in the back you see are absorbing ether. My hair is absorbing ether. This is absorbing ether. But the earth is absorbing so much more ether that there's a huge influx of energy. So we jump up, we are attracted down. What happens to that energy? It's transformed into electromagnetism. That's how you combine gravity with electromagnetism. And that's something that Einstein couldn't do because it threatened his theory of relativity. He was getting close to it. It had to do with the fundamental structure of space. So what is the ether? The ether is the underlying primal energy throughout the universe. You can see galaxies floating in it. And that ether is being absorbed to create the elementary particles, and those elementary particles are transforming that energy into electromagnetism.
So those strange orbs that I saw with my camera when I was checking out the sun that were in the sky look very similar to a few things. They look very similar to stars, which you'll see when you zoom in on them with a really nice camera or telescope, and they look very similar to cymatic patterns, especially bubble cymatics, which we'll get into also very briefly. So just remember, everything is multidimensional. It's not just one way to think about it, there's multi ways. So water can store multiple solvents, and water can also store memory. Don't forget that. Light can also store and send data. Don't forget that. You can understand when you start to think about fiber optics and a cable where it sends data through light. Understand what radiation is. When you have a flashlight, it's radiating light. Anything that radiates is radiation. So light is a form of something radiating. So when a flashlight's on the wall is illuminated, but if the flashlight is on something that can glow in the dark, that object would be irradiated. And the vast spectrum that the world's radiation is measured in is called the electromagnetic spectrum. And the electromagnetic waves are what hold everything together because it's electric and magnetic. We'll get into all this in a minute, but is it actually possible for the sun or the moon to be artificial? Did you know that in Manhattan in 2012, a firm attempted to put an artificial moon in the sky without telling anyone, but they couldn't come up with the funding? And similar to that, in the UK, they had a sun exhibit in which the guests were even able to control the details of this sun with a tablet. Now, just picture this, a lot more money, larger scale, and being held up with something like the Far Infrared Stratospheric Balloon Facility, in which is apparently held up with a massive balloon. Are all satellites held up with a massive balloon? Now, the Chinese artificial sun may have not have been real, but they absolutely have satellites that are reflecting the sun, if not absorbing it all, and then reflecting maybe a different light on the planet for whatever reason. It's absolutely possible. They do it all the time, and they use something called photovoltaic cells that absorb the light and turn it into energy that could power another light device. I mean, just imagine if they used a balloon or some sort of apparatus to take the 1999 Lawrence Livermore Laboratory fusion reactor and just hover it in the sky and have it power something like the German Synlight, in which is a light apparatus in a laboratory in Germany to simulate the sun, which could definitely be put in the sky. Now, going deeper, wouldn't it pop the balloon? Well, just look into cold fusion. It may not be as hot as you think. And just like the fallout clip of the artificial sun in the vault that was underground, and which could have been a metaphor for what we're really in, they also get into cold fusion, limitless energy. And Stuart Swerdlow is one of the many people to refer to the sun as being cold fusion and a portal.
So these objects that are coming in or passing out through the sun, these are actually going through a vortex, if you will. A black hole in one universe coming in through our sun here. Now, there's something else you should know about the sun, because people think, well, is the sun so hot? Wouldn't that burn up the objects? And the answer to that is the sun is actually not hot. And I know that sounds loony-toony to you, but it's cold fusion. Think about something. I'm sure many of you have gone in an airplane, yes? And it could be very hot on the surface of the ground, and then you take off. And if you look at the monitor, you can see, especially on international flights, they do this. As soon as you go into the atmosphere, it's way below zero. 50, 60, 70 below zero. Now think about it. You're going up, literally, closer to the sun. Why does it get colder? Shouldn't it get hot? And if the sun is hot, shouldn't space, interstellar space and the solar system space, shouldn't be warm out in space? But yet it's hundreds of degrees below zero. Why? Because it is not hot. The sun is not hot. It's just light. And what creates the heat on the Earth is our atmosphere.
Now, basically, these things, these stars, these suns are just an atom blown up that would also be a black hole or a star that is a ongoing energy source that would merge different dimensions together, but always producing light and energy. Some sort of reaction, feeding and eating itself, like the image of the snake eating its own tail. Everything's connected, and it goes deep. The sun itself could be our literal bridge to the next dimension when we leave this body. We don't know. We can only see the certain spectrum of light. And that leads me to say, when you really break down the word astronaut, they literally tell you that they don't go astro. They're astronauts. And as always, they prefer the truth as close to your face as possible, because that's the least place that you would think to look. So just remember, everything is connected. Everything is a micro of a macro. It's a bigger of a smaller. Everything is vibration. Are the orbs the spirit world? Are they another dimension? Is it a portal? Are they reflections of a place you can go? Maybe an energetic heaven? Keep these things in mind as we proceed. I also think it's pretty compelling that old encyclopedias and old Bibles all mention the firmament and they're slowly being removed from it. Also, videos of stars look like they're behind water, so I bought a Nikon P1000 and looked myself, and they literally all look like they're behind water.
Here we have a bowl of water, the sun and some black glass. This is the same effect you see when looking at the stars through a telescope or zoom camera. The stars are set in the firmament, and the waters above are behind them. Now look at some clips of stars and tell me they don't look the same as this.
Some people even claim to have seen things like hands and eyes behind these lights. That part's crazy.
Why is there strings of light around that light? Second night I've seen it. So this camera is completely still. Apparently the Earth is rotating, but what? This bright light has been to the right of the moon, or to the left of the moon, to upper left of the moon for a while, and everyone's like, what is it? Now zooming in, there's little lights around it. Now those aren't stars, because you'd be able to see stars. It doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense. You see that? It's like spinning.
You are seeing what you're hearing right now, and this might change your life. This is a very talented singer with her voice projecting through water. And why this is so powerful is because sound travels through all dimensions. In the second dimension, on a plane. In the third dimension, through a medium like water or air. And in the fourth dimension, where light bends around something like a bubble and we can see it and experience it through time, where that energy can flow. As soon as we were able to see this, we started to analyze what these shapes were and how they related to reality. We discovered it contains energy in atoms, and it gives those atoms the structure that they need to pair themselves with other atoms, making molecules. This builds everything around us. Our ancient homies knew this, and they made art to reflect that, to teach through that art. In doing this, they literally built the entire consciousness of humanity, which is also vibration. But it appears that most people have got lost looking for the broadcast without realizing they are the broadcast. If this was taught in schools, we would not have an education problem. This is cymatics and the study of sonic geometry. In simple terms, it's measuring the shapes that form on water when sound goes through it. Let me show you what it can do. These are concentric circular patterns. It's like a ripple in a pond, and Kepler used it to get a pretty accurate measurement of the orbits of the planets. It's one of the most basic ways to view a wave or a vibration. Spiral cymatics usually mean that energy is flowing. Just remember, if you flow, you are a flower. Nodal cymatics are formed when there's a big difference in amplitude, or the positive and negative part of a wave. It creates this pocket, which you can see a lot in fruit, but we can also see it in the notes of the piano, the THC molecule, hydrogen molecule, and the Schumann resonance. If you see a linear cymatic, it has a lot of spokes, and these are generally used for communication. If you saw the pufferfish video, that's how they communicate. It transmits a lot of data. Cathedrals also use them. These are cellular cymatics. They're used a lot in architecture and for storing things. They create standing waves that you can trap things in. It's very efficient when you need space, or if you're going to space, like the James Webb Space Telescope. Particle collider has an almost perfect cymatic ratio, this outer layer being nodal and that inner layer being linear. You see this geometry a lot in the Vedic or Hindu culture. We're masters of vibration and sonic geometry, which is why there's a Shiva statue outside of CERN. This geometry also explains proportion, why the Florence Cathedral dome follows this ratio to explain creation, which is also how mathematics explains creation, as well as the spiritual traditions with the flower of life. So just in a minute and a half, we have covered cosmology, physics, mathematics, quantum science, biology, geometry, and architecture. We could also use it to explain how the ancients explained reality or reincarnation. The earliest forms of life are cymatic patterns, and your DNA uses it to expand and contract for gene expression. You could explain music theory or pretty much anything else that you can see with it. Bubble cymatics. Probably going to want to sit down for this, because you're looking at a 4-dimensional hologram. Watch this. When you blow a bubble on a speaker, the light that's shined on the speaker gets reflected in a pattern that reflects the frequency. The sound traveling through the speaker and the bubble warps the bubble into a shape of the sound. You'll see in this one that it's mixing up the fluid as well. Different frequencies, different patterns. If you know the correct frequency, you can control the pattern. This is very important because these patterns control things like the currents in the oceans. Liquids and gases allow us to see the movement of energy going through them. With bubble cymatics, we can better understand and make them, even shaping them into 4D objects like the torus. So what is 4D? 4D just means that you cannot perceive the shape unless the shape is moving. Otherwise, it looks like a bent, twisted 3D shape. Sound travels through a wire, hits the speaker, and then the speaker projects that pattern through the air. It's literally flying math. That's what you're seeing right there. Those images are a projection of that geometry, like a shadow of a very complex object. That is what you see in the patterns. That pattern right there is literally a slice through a bubble traveling through the air. It's frozen frequency. You're actually probably very aware of what dimensions are. 1 is a point, 2 is a line, 3 is depth. If you keep expanding, you progress in complexity. If you rotate that object, you get its dimensional symmetry. So we expand the dimension and then we rotate it to look straight down it. This way we can see the pattern of that dimension. Right here, we're just making higher dimensional cubes, which can be reduced back to a point. A 10 cube is called a decorect. In the shape, the points are corners and the lines are edges. If we overlay that on the cymatic, we see the geometry of the frequency. That cymatic has 10 folds, 10 slices of that pizza. The corners and edges of that 10 cube bend the light into that pattern. Some of the corners and edges reflect, some of them cast shadows. Some of them reflect into shapes like that. Who cares? Seeing this is like seeing through the veil, the illusion of the dimension that you're in. Recognizing these patterns allows you to see how your brain is building the hologram frame by frame. You're just reading frequency. That is a freezing ball of water, and I'm going to use it to explain the entire planet. Now this is very cool, but if you watch very carefully, there's a hidden code within these bubbles. That code is the key to how all things in nature operate, how we observe them. Let me explain. If we look at a freezing pond or a snowflake, they freeze the same way. At their core, they are scale invariant. It doesn't matter what size they are. If we put a bubble on a speaker, we can use that to explain how these clouds form on this mountain. If I change the frequency of that bubble, I can use it to explain these clouds. But this is only a small piece of the puzzle. I can also explain how the winds work on Earth, because Earth is a giant bubble that spins. When it spins, it creates these air currents. You can also see these in the ocean. All of this works whether it's a bubble or the ocean. Scale invariant. So let's look at why. The interaction of these bubbles creates a pattern. If we take this bubble and then we draw more bubbles from the center of that bubble and keep going out, we get this particular shape. In this shape, we can create all shapes, but let's look at a hexagon. A hexagon we see in bubbles when they get smushed together. We also see this in molecules. Molecules form stuff that life can use to build more stuff. In the mineral kingdom, this is how lava pools and crystals form. They use this because it's very structurally sound. Crystals on an ice ball can teach you all of that. Forbidden City, China. They are guarded by these guys. Look really closely at what that paw is sitting on. Do you know what that is? That is knowledge that was guarded at all costs in every culture in the ancient world. To understand what this was, you had to go through a very intense process, training in many temples to become worthy of knowing. They guarded it so closely because learning it unlocks new pathways in the mind, a new way of seeing the world. They figured out a way to teach you everything you need to know about the universe using only a circle and a straight line. When you draw a bunch of circles and connect those lines, you can project it into 3D as this shape. It's the vector matrix. It's where our concept of the matrix comes from. Inside the circle is a tetrahedron, a three-sided pyramid. It's the simplest shape you can draw to triangulate any point within any circle. Now, if that matrix is a fabric of space-time, we can grab that fabric and twist it down to create a particle. This goes straight into the concept of the atom. The atom comes from the word atum in Egypt. Read that description. It's also the origin of ADM, atom, in Hebrew. So up here you can see the shape evolving into the icon that we know. That icon geometrically is the vector equilibrium. It's one of the most stable shapes because all lines and angles are exactly the same throughout the whole shape. That is an actual picture from IBM of an atom. Check out how closely all of those points hit on the electron clouds. Now the Bohr model makes a little bit more sense. If that wasn't weird enough, this knowledge goes smaller. That is a quantum carpet. They're used to visualize particle density and explain how waves become particles. Now all of these translate into complex math equations. If we mathematically map out the quantum carpet of a torus, we get that. Do you see a pattern here? In my last video, I showed you how the ancient Sumerians knew about this quantum wave interaction. So ancient Sumerians knew about this, ancient Chinese knew about this, ancient Hindus knew about this, Native Americans knew about this, ancient Egyptians knew about this, but you don't know about this. The way we learn today is not natural. Anything you learn should be simple and it should be related to the real world because that's where you exist. This stuff clicks so well because you see it and you experience it every single day. Humans used to educate through art and architecture. This would install the understanding through experience. We don't remember things that don't have an emotion behind them. A sense of awe and wonder and beauty is unforgettable. If you resonate with this, you are remembering. To remember is to reassemble the pieces or members that build you. As we know, energy cannot be created or destroyed. And by design, there's a natural way of accessing this in here. A nostalgic song can bring back a very powerful memory. And just like that, the more pieces I can get you to remember, the more powerful that memory will be. The elegance is in simplicity, and the best teachers are artists. You don't have to understand, you just have to be inspired to look deeper. If your ancestors can do it, if they can do it, or if I can unlock a little piece of that inside of you, then you can see what life actually is. And then you have the tools to play the game. For those who do not know about water, this may freak you out. Veda Austin has stumbled upon some pretty wild stuff. She let salt water evaporate in a petri dish with a pyramid in it, and the salt water crystallized into little mini pyramids. Now to test this, she used the same salt water and let it evaporate without the pyramid, and it formed its normal cubical shape. Now water is pretty unique in the universe. If you get it in your car motor, it'll lock it up and bend all the metal, and it's also how we turn turbines in coal plants. It exists in all 3 states on the planet, and it is a very powerful solvent. Its molecules are shaped like hexagons, and we see this when it freezes. This means that anything that is dissolved in it can be stored in it, which is why you should always filter and realign your water if you can. I've shown you through cymatics that your DNA also shares this same shape. And using cymatics, we can read it like a song. If Veda left this in a quiet room, it's probably resonating at the Schumann resonance, about 7 hertz, the resonance of the planet. When that crystal vibrates, it transmits that vibration to the salt crystals via the water. There's a fantastic research paper on this by How Science. They transmitted an entire genetic sequence through water using 7 hertz. They put 2 beakers of water next to each other. One was pure water, one was DNA. They then subjected them both to 7 hertz and waited 18 hours. After using a polymerase reaction, they recreated the DNA. If that wasn't enough, a team of researchers made a hard drive using the same technique. It stored the data of 2 trillion CDs in a gram, and it read it 10,000 times faster.
You've all learned in school, in middle school, that water has 3 phases, solid, ice, liquid, and vapor. Well, we uncovered a 4th phase of water. It turns out that there are unexpected applications to this. The first one is getting energy from water. The way this water forms is very simple. Whenever water meets hydrophilic material, by hydrophilic I mean water-loving, it undergoes a radical transformation. That we were astonished to see this, that the water molecules are actually lining up with one another in some ordered fashion. Like a liquid crystal, if you will, it's H3O2. Particles, and later we found molecules, are progressively excluded from this zone that was sitting right next to the surface. We also call it the exclusion zone, or EZ for short. This 4th phase of water is not neutral. Typically, it's negatively charged, and the water just beyond it is positively charged. And as you might guess, if you stick 2 electrodes, one in the negative, one in the positive, you have a battery, and that battery can light a light bulb, for example, and we've demonstrated that. Where do we get our energy? Now, obviously, we get a lot of energy from food, but I'm going to introduce the idea that we might get additional energy from light. Nature commonly uses light to supply energy. So green plants soak up light and convert that light into chemical energy. The roots of the plant absorb water, and that water goes to the leaves. And what happens in the leaves is that when they receive light, they take the water that's inside them and split the water into positive and negative, H plus, OH minus. This is the first step of photosynthesis. You might say light creates this kind of battery with plus and minus. Are we also solar powered? Do we use light to get some of our energy? And I'll show you that we actually do. We engage in the first step of photosynthesis, that is the splitting of water into the negative and positive. And in our laboratory at the University of Washington, we're studying water, and we came upon something really interesting. When water meets certain materials, these are hydrophilic or water-loving materials. So what happens is that the water molecules split into the positive and negative, and the negative ones line up, as you see here, next to the hydrophilic material. This is actually negatively charged water is, in fact, a different phase of water. It's not even H2O, it's actually H3O2. It's what we found. And we refer to this 4th phase, if you will, of water that is beyond solid, liquid, and vapor. This 4th phase is semi-crystalline water as EZ. So what's EZ? EZ stands for exclusion zone. And the reason we called it exclusion zone when we found it is as this phase of water builds, it pushes out everything that's inside of the water, that is solutes, particles, whatever. Essentially, this is potential energy because it's just like a battery of water. And all batteries, of course, need to get charged. And the question is, where does the energy come from to charge this battery? And the answer came from a student. He took a lamp. He shined the lamp on the chamber, and what he saw was really astonishing. He noticed that because of the illumination, the exclusion zone, or EZ, expands. And it expanded hugely, and when he took the lamp away, it came back to its original shape, which is a thin band of EZ you see at the upper left running parallel to the surface. So maybe the light is what's responsible, the photons are responsible for providing the energy to grow this exclusion zone. And we began to study different wavelengths of light, ranging from the ultraviolet through the visible light, through the infrared light. And we found that by far the most effective light was infrared. Infrared is actually all over. It's hard to get rid of, and it's not just inside, it's outside too. And because it's there all the time, it means that when you have water next to a hydrophilic material, you always have EZ water. And of course, if you add more light, then the EZ grows. Cells actually operate much the same way, also as a light-driven battery. Inside the cell, you've got large macromolecules, mostly proteins, and these proteins have hydrophilic surfaces. And of course, there's water, lots of water inside the cell. And so what happens is that there are exclusion zones. You have EZ water, which has negative charge. And the positive charges would be lying beyond those negative charges. So the reality is the cell is really crowded with proteins mostly. And this negative EZ practically fills the cell. And what happens is that the positive charges are pushed out and the cell is negative. You have potential energy from the EZ which drives the work of the cell. Light, as I said, is responsible for building the EZ and building negative charge, and that's what gives the cell its energy. Light is actually driving your function. Light matters for function and therefore for health, and water matters for function and therefore for health, because they all build EZs, and the EZs are needed for proper function. So for your health, what builds EZ water in your cells? Well, there are a few things we can think about. First of all, drinking water. Well, water is the raw material for building EZ water, and so obviously you need to be hydrated in order to function properly. Green juicing. The juice is the inside of the cells of the plant. So you're basically extracting EZ water from the plant cells and putting it into your cells. Good strategy, and that's why many integrative medical health professionals suggest that green juicing is the single easiest and best way to maintain your health. There are some substances that are known through the millennia to be good for health, and these are just a couple of examples. Turmeric, coconut water. We've studied a half dozen of these experimentally in the laboratory. And we found that putting a certain amount in the water, an amount that corresponds to the amount that might be in your body, builds EZ. It's not published yet, but we're on to it. Sunshine, you go out in the sun, you feel good, you feel healthy, good to be alive. Well, light that you receive builds EZ. And the sauna is perhaps even more effective because the heat means that it's generating infrared light. And infrared light is what builds EZ powerfully and effectively, and that's why you feel good after you come out of the sauna. And finally, grounding, sometimes called earthing, connecting yourself to the ground. Well, you can do this by taking off your shoes and walking on the beach. You see, and you feel good. And why do you feel good? Well, you're connecting yourself to the earth. And the earth has been known for a century to be negatively charged. It's a vast repository, practically infinite repository of negative charge. So you soak up this negative charge, which then builds EZ.
Now you can defocus like this on the moon, the sun, and it doesn't happen. You don't see this pattern. You only see this pattern in the middle of stars. Wow, that's incredible. Just incredible. There we are, back in perfect focus. Let's tighten it up a little more. There we go.
better. Then we'll go back to the right. There's right of focus. When you see a donut, like a straight up hole in the middle, that is completely out of focus. Still looks cool, and it shows you the water, the ripples in the water above the firmament, much, much clearer. That's because the eyepiece has been moved closer to the primary mirror, the objective lens of the telescope. So technically you are getting a closer look. It's just moved too close, so close that the center obstruction that holds the secondary mirror on the front of the telescope has come into view. Now you back it off, and it looks like you're zooming out. Man, look at that. See, now we don't have a hole or a donut anymore. Look at that. It's incredible.
It's almost like the two different types of densities of water. If you look up the clip of the guy who discovered the underwater river, it'll give you more context into how this could work.
If you haven't heard of it, you better buckle up your seatbelts because I doubt you'll even believe me. So the deep scattering layer is like a wall or like a floor, a layer, and for a while scientists thought it was the bottom of the ocean. It literally just looks like the floor of the ocean until they found out it was moving. Turns out it's literally a wall of condensed fish. They had a hard time figuring that out because the layer is made up of mesopelagic fish which bounce sonar waves. But after they discovered it, they realized that the whole wall literally moves to the surface at night and back down to the bottom during the day. The whole deep scattering layer moves as one unit, and scientists say it's so dense that it could make up for 65% of all fish biomass. Every one of its movements follows the sun and the moon. Scientists say that this is no accident and that the fish intentionally formed this layer, but they don't know why.
From somewhere in the depths of the sea, at 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 feet, in regions where sunlight almost ceases to exist, there is an echo of sound. A response to the pulse of the searching sonar. A chorus of answers to the sound sent down from passing ship and submarine. Who or what reflects that sound? Something that creates the illusion of an ocean floor, where no floor can exist. This is the story of an ocean phenomenon known as the deep scattering layer. It is a story that involves the scientists of the Navy and of the nation's oceanographic research institutions. Men who seek new answers to old questions, and in the process, open doors to whole new worlds of discovery and benefit for mankind. Ancients saw the depths as the domain of monsters, able to crush a ship with jaw or coil or tentacle. Return with helpless victims to their deep-lying lairs. Ancient and modern fishermen, dropping their nets on dark nights, have sometimes found strange forms amid their catches. Forms that recall the old stories and cause men to wonder about other shapes that may lie in the waters below. Man developed clever new listening devices, devices that could hear a submarine underwater. They heard a whole host of other sounds, too. The sounds of life in the sea. The sounds of whales. Of shrimp. of dolphins, the sounds of groupers and other fish. Man also developed the echo sounder, or sonar. A pulse of sound sent out from a speaker located in the ship's hull travels to the bottom and is reflected back to the ship. Because the approximate speed of sound is known, the dial can be calibrated to read off the depth to the bottom. And a recorder can trace the bottom contour. Now man had a way to see for great distances beneath the ocean surface. Something in the sea was returning an echo, and that something was to be the subject of research and controversy for over 3 decades. The false bottom is obviously of great importance to the Navy, especially the submariner and the anti-submarine specialist. Scientists began extensive studies of these layers of sound return. They saw some layers migrate up at night, almost to the surface, and down again with the first light of dawn. They lowered sound equipment in the layer to get close-up profiles of the reverberations. They lowered devices to test the water, and others for sampling the ocean at the scattering layer depth to determine the water temperature, current strength, and chemical composition. Some researchers used explosive charges to provide a broad band of sound frequencies. The echoes were made visible, and the researchers studied the effect of the deep scattering layer on the different sound frequencies produced. They found that for some reason, only certain frequencies or tones were returned. A layer might scatter sound at one frequency when at a depth of 3,000 feet, but at 500 feet, the frequency would be entirely different. They also learned that some fishes scatter sound, in this case because of resonance. These fish have swim bladders, internal gas bubbles which the fish use to maintain their level in the ocean. Sometimes sound waves make these swim bladders resonate and return a powerful amplified echo. At different depth levels, changes in water pressure and in the size of the fish's swim bladder affect the resonance phenomenon. In the 1960s, a new oceanographic tool, the deep submersible, made it possible to track the deep scattering layer right into the depths. Now, for the first time, man could venture down to see with his own eyes the creatures responsible for the sonar echo. The deep submersible could be fitted with many devices. Its own sonar to track down the mysterious echoes. Hydrophones to listen to the sounds of underwater life. Tape recorders to preserve those sounds for later study. A unique laboratory at the Navy's Undersea Research and Development Center, San Diego, is used to study underwater sound.
In order to detect a submarine, our sonar sends out a pulse of energy, or a sound burst, which is shown here as just arriving at the submarine. At this point, it will send back an echo to the sonar. However, you will see that the sound wave is hitting the deep scattering layer as well. This sends back echoes which constitute interference with the signal coming back from the submarine. Research on the deep scattering layer is important, both from the point of view of the sonar system trying to detect a submarine, and from the point of view of a submarine trying to hide from the sonar system. The information that is gathered from experiments on the deep scattering layer is fed back to marine biologists, fisheries people, and a broad spectrum of oceanographic interests.
A research vessel takes station off the Atlantic coast in a Navy project called Ocean Acre. Involved are scientists from the Naval Underwater Sound Laboratory, the Naval Oceanographic Office, the U.S. Bureau of Commercial Fisheries, the Smithsonian Institution, and the University of Rhode Island. The ship takes station 4 times a year for 5 years. The scientists are attempting to learn all they can about this particular patch of seawater, its physical characteristics, and the life that exists here. They record the deep scattering layer on their surface sonars, and the acoustic findings are correlated with biological studies. Ships and scientists from our own and other nations are at work in all the oceans of the world, gathering information about the marine life that exists many thousands of feet below the surface. These men are at work, at sea and in their laboratories ashore, translating data into ideas, and ideas into programs and equipment and techniques. From what was once an echo of sound, there has now emerged a storehouse of knowledge. It is a story that involves the scientists of the Navy and of the nation's oceanographic research institutions, men who seek new answers to old questions, and in the process, open a door to a whole new world.
One of the strangest places on the ocean's floor was only just discovered in the 1990s. And Mike Degree is one of a handful of people to ever see it in person.
Without a doubt, one of the most amazing things that I had ever seen in the bottom of the ocean. It was while filming for Blue Planet in the Gulf of Mexico. And I noticed there's something out in the distance. Couldn't tell exactly what, but it looked like a dark band. And as we approached it, the dark band became a donut. I saw this donut that was black in the center. What the heck is that? And so as we get closer and closer to it, I noticed that the black band had what appeared to be kind of steam over it. And then I looked, and there was water lapping against the shoreline. This band was a ring of mussels. And inside the ring of mussels was a lake. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm already underwater. We went out over the water in this lake and tried to descend in it and bounced off. It was so super saline and dense that the submarine couldn't go down it. We literally bounced off. And as we bounced off, we sent ripples heading back to the shoreline. It was insane. I've never seen anything like it.
I grew up in Mobile, Alabama. Somebody's got to be from Mobile, right? And Mobile sits at the confluence of 5 rivers, forming this beautiful delta.
It was this delta that sparked Mike Degree's interest in underwater filmmaking. Degree became famous for his work with Oscar-winning director James Cameron filming the wreck of the Titanic. He was working on a new project with Cameron in Australia when the helicopter he was flying in crashed, killing Degree and the pilots. Cameron issued this statement, quote, "Mike and Andrew were like family to me. They were my deep-sea brothers, and both were true explorers. Degree was one of the ocean's warriors."
And when you see people do things like put one end of this negative into the ground and then the positive up on a balloon, and the higher it goes, the more electricity it gets, it really makes you take this whole concept home.
What's up, TikTok? So I'm doing an experiment that I've been wanting to do for a while, and it's measuring the ether or the voltage in the air. And I've got a setup and a little bit of light left. I wanted to show y'all what I've got going on here. So I got my multimeter. The red lead is hooked up to the ground wire. I got the ground rod over there. The black lead is hooked up to a 50-foot spool of 26 gauge magnet wire. And it is actually hooked up to a carbon fiber rod that I sanded down and got bare copper touching it, hooked up to some balloons. So I'm going to be measuring. I have the wire marked at every 10 feet. And so I'm going to measure the voltage at 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, and 40 feet. So I'm going to document this, and I'll be posting the video in a few minutes. Okay, bye. What's up, TikTok? I currently have a set of balloons. I'm running out of daylight here, but I have carbon rod hooked up to those balloons and wire connected down to my multimeter. And it is grounded into my ground rod. I'm running out of daylight, but right now I'm about 30 feet in the air. I have the wire marked every 10 feet. I'm currently at 24, 27 volts. And I'll show you what happens when I start pulling it down. So right now, I have about 50 feet of wire that I can uncoil, but I'm not going to tonight. I'll do it when I have more daylight. But here's what happens when I start pulling it down. Now here it goes down. We're about 15 feet. Bear up. Still about 10 feet. Down even further. So as I pull it down, it gets less voltage that is absorbing from the atmosphere. Turn the light back on. So now we're at roughly probably 6 feet above my head. And now we'll let the wire go and you can watch it climb. The higher you go up, the more energy you get. Alright, anyway, I'll make another video tomorrow when I have more light, but that's what they mean when you're harvesting energy from the ether. The higher you go up, the more voltage you get. That's AC current, 21.5 volts. I'm about 25-30 feet above my head. Anyway, cheers.
Much of the following explanation is adapted from Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman's lecture on physics, his section called Electricity in the Atmosphere. For every meter you go up in the air, the voltage increases by around 100 volts, or we could say around 100 volts per yard. We can draw these voltage increases using what are called equipotential lines. Notice that the ground is negative and the sky is positive with respect to each other. According to Feynman, this extends upward to 50 kilometers, or 31 miles, where the air is very conductive. This is the case in fair weather. In stormy weather, like a thunderstorm, things are quite different.
Так у меня какая-то ничего, я не знаю, что это такое. Так я не понимаю. На пальце звонил, говорю. Я научился управлять этими местами. Знаешь, что это такое? Ари, криво сделал мне. Оставь. Поехали.
But if this voltage exists between your head and the ground, why don't you get a shock? The reason is that your body is a good enough electrical conductor that standing on the ground, you're basically a part of the ground. The equipotential lines would look like this. There's still effectively 0 volts between the top of your head and ground. Similar effects happen with trees, buildings, and so on. What about the electric current? The downward electrical current exists and consists of positive ions, molecules or clumps of matter that have a positive charge. These ions are moving slowly toward the ground. The current density from these ions is very small, around 10 microamps, or 10 picoamps, crossing each square meter or yard every second. So in any small area, there's not a lot of power. And that's the explanation about atmospheric electricity adapted from Feynman's lectures. To take advantage of this atmospheric electricity, we electrically connect one end of a wire to the ground and lift the other end up into the air. In our case, we got good results at around 120 meters or 390 feet up. At 100 volts per meter or 100 volts per yard, that's 12,000 volts between that height and the ground. But just as with you standing on the ground, the wire is an electrical conductor, and so is also at ground potential. Looking at the equipotential lines around the wire, that voltage of 12,000 volts exists between some distance away from the wire and the wire. You can see that the equipotential lines are closest together at the top of the wire. This means the attraction is strongest there, and electrons make their way upward in the wire. Let's look more closely at the top of the wire. We'd put 6 sharp points using sewing pins at the top of that wire, but for ease of illustration I'll draw just one. Notice that because of the sharp shape at the point, the charges are crowded together at that point. Remember also that there are positively charged ions in the air. An electric field exists between the negative charges on the wire and the positive charges in the air, and we can represent that electric field by drawing lines between pairs of opposite charges. Notice that the electric field lines are closer together near the point, meaning the electric field is stronger there. It's strong enough to remove the negative electrons from the sharp point, where they neutralize positive ions. But due to the voltage, there are fresh positive ions moving downward and fresh negative charges coming up from the wire. We now have electricity flowing through the wire. The electric current in that electricity is very weak though. We didn't measure it, but from my experience with electrostatics, I'd estimate it in the low microamps, or more likely even lower. That's not enough to turn an electromagnetic motor, one like you use in everyday life, but it is enough to turn an electrostatic motor, like this corona motor. The corona motor consists of a plastic cylinder surrounded by sharp-edged metal blades. Every second one of those blades is connected to the wire going up into the sky. That means that when the wire starts conducting, those blades are now at whatever voltage the top of the wire is up in the sky, though opposite in polarity, positive. That's why you get a shock when you touch one of those wires. Negative charge is then pulled from the plastic cylinder through a gap between the edge of the blade and the cylinder. That leaves the cylinder with the same charge, and since like charges repel, a repulsion occurs that rotates the cylinder. The next blade is connected to earth ground and becomes negatively charged, and since opposite charges attract, it attracts the charged area of the cylinder. It then neutralizes that charged area by taking electrons from the ground. And that's how atmospheric electricity can power an electrostatic motor like a corona motor. Well, thanks for watching.
Now with this new information I found on ether, it's given me an opportunity to expand on a theory that I've had for a while. I call this theory matrix parallel realms theory. So just keep in mind, the deeper you go, the more this theory may break. This theory is definitely limited and just for a visualization of a larger concept. So on one side, we just start off with the ocean. We're going to call this the sea realm, and it's full of marine life with the substrate of water. Now just keep in mind a few things. Number one, their intelligence level of most of the marine life, they cannot comprehend the life on land or on Terra, like engines or quantum physics or poetry, right? They're kind of at level 1 in this scenario. Another thing to keep in mind is crabs, they can't swim, and they look up at fish, and I bet you they think the fish are birds, right? Fish can hover up there because they have a special bladder that holds air and allows them to hover, and they don't have to be on the seabed. I can guarantee you the fish and the crabs and the marine life are not aware of actually being in water. So I've always asked myself, are we in some sort of water? Now let's compare the sea realm to the Terra realm, which is where I say we are. So for most creatures in both realms, when you leave that realm, your vision gets blurry. If we go in the water, our eyes are blurry. If fish come out, their eyes are blurry. Yes, there's some exceptions. Also, we both can't breathe in each other's realm. Yes, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, that is the rule. Also, both realms have beings that can walk and fly. For instance, octopus like to walk on the seabed and swim as well. We have eagles that like to walk and also fly, and other birds. So when we think about the intelligence of the Terra realm, which is humans and most mammals, we can pretty much comprehend the marine life, their fish habitats, their behaviors, their plant life, and more. Also, what would our substrate be if we're in some sort of water and we didn't know? According to this research here, our substrate would be ether. And Nikola Tesla explained that the ether is the substrate that electromagnetic waves travel on. An electromagnetic wave, literally how our cells are being held together. So this seems to be some sort of, not water, but water. So according to this research, gravity is actually the ether falling on top of us from the red sun that is producing the ether, falling on top of us like a waterfall, being absorbed in the center of the earth by potentially a black sun or another star that's absorbing what the other star is producing. And apparently, gravity is that waterfall on top of us, holding us down. And this theory says that our nucleuses, or our cells, the building blocks of us, are always absorbing ether at all times. So if we become aware of this, it's my theory that we may have latent instincts or abilities that may come online and teach us how to manipulate the ether in different ways, kind of like airbending, or kind of like just breathing in general. Maybe we'll get access to a new muscle we didn't know we had. Is this where pyrokinesis comes from? Telekinesis? Is manipulating the ether a way that we can actually fly like Neo and break the Matrix, or even go Dragon Ball Z, charge up and actually manipulate energy and redirect the ether to fly? It's my theory that yes, you absolutely can, and this would be a mechanism given to us by the creator, but just simple knowledge that we forgot or was stolen from us. If we are light beings and we can only see in a specific wavelength of a large spectrum, I ask you, do we have a larger part to our anatomy, to our body? Maybe a light aspect, maybe light wings, or a flying mechanism that would allow us to maneuver or swim through this ether. Really not that crazy when we break it down in certain ways. I successfully lucid dreamed one time and I flew and I played with that mechanism in that world. And I'm telling you, since I did that, I knew that it was possible here. I just didn't know how. Now that I understand, I have a direction. I promise you I'll fly before I die. Just keep in mind we're interdimensional beings, and as we're going forward, the ether would be positive and the water would be negative, which is where our bodies could literally naturally create some sort of thrust out of thin air. So now thinking about the intelligence levels, we have the C level, level 1 intelligence, our level, level 2. Going higher, we have a level 3. And again, there could be marine life that are 10 times more advanced than we are, but for this specific model, for the visualization, just roll with me here. So within this area that we can't see, we have the electromagnetic realm, and I call this realm the realm of the ghosts, the archons, and the other interdimensional beings that we can't see. Now the sky's the limit to who resides in this realm, whether it's just passed away souls or if it's literally fallen angels or angels in general. Just keep in mind that electromagnetic frequencies or radiation has been proven to be able to pass electricity through the air. So these waves can handle an electric charge, which is what we're all said to be. And what these entities would be is electricity or electromagnetic beings. And for some reason, these entities, I'm assuming, are not all more intelligent, but a lot of them are more intelligent than we are, to the point where we can't comprehend that world, but they can comprehend ours. They can affect us, they can drain us, but we can't drain them in theirs, probably because we don't have the knowledge, probably because it was taken from us. More lost, hidden knowledge. Just remember, some beings, when we're comparing electromagnetic, sea, and terra realms, some beings like dolphins, Bigfoot, and monks, human monks, are said to be able to be interdimensional on command or on purpose. Who knows? I'm not one of those people, so I can't confirm either way, just a theory. The other aspect is some beings can only see certain spectrums, like us humans. We can only see visible light. There's a lot we can't see, like snakes. They can only see heat. So talking about this invisible world isn't that crazy. These are speculations based on science. And just remember, each realm affects each other. For instance, water affects terra by evaporation of water for rain clouds, and terra affects water by things like pollution. And just the final aspect of this theory is the aspect of how we literally render our own reality all the time, and it doesn't affect anyone else's rendering of their reality. So the way this theory works is there's unlimited parallel universes to ours, and that goes up, down, left, right, diagonal, everywhere, unlimited dimensions. And the further away you go from this one, the central one, the more different it is. And the thing is, we're swimming in and out of this matrix of dimensions. It's unlimited, and we swim in and out of each one all the time, depending on your thoughts and your emotions combined together. And this is something that we can control and steer when you get control of your consciousness by simply just being aware of all of the different variables that are affecting you every single day, whether it's your emotions, your thoughts, and just being in control of all of that and steering it in a particular direction with the intention, the added intention of meaning to do this. You will make a massive difference in how quick you render your own reality, or manifest, as some like to call it. And if you think this is insane, you need to look into the double slit experiment. There's plenty of videos out there on it, but that experiment proved that we basically manifest our own reality through interfacing with subatomic particles, particles that are smaller than atoms, that are a building block of all of reality, that only come into existence when we interact with them through our thought, or simply by observing. And I believe this entire concept because of how complex it is, and the deeper you go, you hit a wall. And that proves to us that we are just like the fish when it comes to the next level. There are just some things that we cannot comprehend in this form. Our brains just cannot fit them in our head. And when you get to understand that, you can start to find the shortcut to reach your maximum potential. You think of things like Tartaria and the mud floods, and when you get into that, you see things like at the tip of all of these buildings like churches, that really sharp point could have been literally to get this electricity, this energy, and utilize it. So the question is, if Satan or Lucifer, if they were beings of light, and if we're beings of light, and if light literally is the EMF spectrum, electromagnetic fields, and when Tesla said that the ether is literally the water that the waves of EMF travel on, the waves, just like waves in water, ripples, we can only see the visible light spectrum on this entire spectrum. So maybe these demons are in a X-ray spectrum where we can't see, and maybe the X-ray spectrum is coming from that black sun, which could be a portal in another dimension. I mean, at that thought, what if planet Nibiru or planet X was our real sun, and that the sun we have now is artificial, and they literally just did change the bulb? So the Freemasons claim that there are two suns and no moon, which would mean that the black sun is actually the thing that's affecting the tide, and it's just a projection that we see as the moon, which would imply that the moon just showed up when they maybe changed the spectrum of the black sun. Maybe the black sun wasn't always black. Maybe they changed it just like they changed our sun here, and a consequence of them changing that sun down there is the fact that now we see with our eyes an X-ray projection on the firmament. At the end of the day, when you crack open all these lies and you realize that the sky's the limit, you don't ever disbelieve anything until you dig deep into it, and then you can come to a conclusion, or not. Just keep in mind that Admiral Byrd flew around and went to Antarctica and supposedly found a hole, and now Antarctica is a no-fly zone. There's places all around the world that connect deep underground where people go missing. They also say we're in a small section of a large territory, and that there's a bunch of land and different creatures beyond our territory that could be the extraterrestrials that we see. And it's not about it being flat. If anything, check out the Norb theory. It's a combination of flat and round. Who knows what it is? We can only believe what we can see with our eyes. So is this why we only see one side of the moon, because it's a projection? Who knows? The only thing we know less about than space is probably the ocean. Just remember, as above, so below in so many aspects. Just really think about those two densities of water, two worlds under there.